Chapter 319. AD on the title began. AD on the title in Dead One Body Scroll Chapter 359. The Gods and the Star Lords' style equals color. Hashtag 00F. Ref equals ML. Next chapter / add a villager border equals 0 trit table border equals 0 align equals left trit table border equals 0 align equals left trit table border equals 0 align equals left. TRTD / TR / table. The Celestial Society was an organization made up of Star Lords and gods. It was probably a name given by a certain Star Lord. According to the grammar of the heavenly world, the word celestial represented both the heavenly world and the world of gods. But no matter what, this proved that the two worlds had long since come into contact. It just so happened that Gunnan's arrangements in Blood City had reached the final stage. Next, he just had to wait for the Blood Breeds and Clear River Pavilion to awaken Kane's left hand. At this point, this matter no longer had much to do with Gunnan. He just needed to watch the show. Unsealing Kane's left hand was a relatively complicated process. It didn't just require killing a lot of people. Otherwise, Gunnan wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. He could just capture a group of people and kill them. In order to awaken Kane's left hand, 3 or more blood breeds had to kill their opponents and use their blood to open the first seal. Only then would the hearts of 3 high-ranking blood breeds be used to open the second seal. Moreover, the final unsealing of Kane's left hand could only be completed by mortals. At most, players would be the Oriole behind the scenes. The reason why the quest was so complicated was also to make the game more interesting. In reality, the Undead Kingdom was no longer a map at the beginner's village level. When players arrived here, their basic strength was around grade 5 or even higher. So in order to prevent players from directly crushing the quest with their strength, the truly valuable items were more complicated to obtain. They wouldn't let players kill the big boss and drop equipment. Originally, if nothing happened, Gunnan didn't mind staying behind to control the overall situation in case something unexpected happened. But now, he was even more interested in something else. The mysterious Celestial Society had already attracted all of Gunnan's attention. As for the Blood Race's divine artifact, Zhongdai and Shana, as well as the young girl No Return and Violet Lightning, who were waiting far away in Skeleton City, they could all be tossed aside. Elemental Plane. Gunnan and Sylvia's figures appeared here, surrounded by a lightning storm. This was a unique scenery of the Elemental Plane. This naturally formed elemental storm was enough to make it difficult for legendary powerhouses to move. Only elemental creatures could walk on it like it was flat ground. Of course, with Gunnan's strength, they could ignore this mere elemental storm. The worldview of the Pantheon world was different from that of the heavenly worlds. The most typical characteristic was that all the primary planes in the world of gods did not belong to any particular god. Instead, they were owned by 2 major god systems. There was even a neutral primary plane like the Undead Nation. Unlike the heavenly worlds, the true major planes were all astral realms belonging to almighty beings. Perhaps there were neutral planes, but the reason for their existence was that they were too small and no astral lord was interested in them. The elemental plane that Gunnan was currently in was a classic example of a neutral plane. This plane was not suitable for the survival of any corporeal life forms. Only elemental creatures could live well here, so even the gods had no interest in it. Sylvia had brought Gunnan here to meet the other members of the Celestial Society. They did not have to wait too long. An indescribable aura descended upon them. Sylvia's eyes lit up, but Gunnan was the first to speak. Lorenza, the goddess of flowers, Lorenza, was a powerful god with rank 10 power. She was only one step away from becoming a main god. Back when a water element godhead had appeared in the heavenly worlds, the Lon siblings had mysteriously appeared there. This had puzzled Gunnan for a long time. How did they get to the heavenly worlds, and how did they know the whereabouts of the godhead? Now that he thought about it, it was most likely because Lorenza had joined the Celestial Society. In fact, she might have already infiltrated the heavenly worlds. The heavenly worlds were naturally filled with countless planes, making them much more suitable for hiding. If they hid in a small plane, Not even the 13 Star-Lords would be able to detect them. A woman dressed in a black and white nun's robe with an ice-cold expression slowly walked out of the boundless storm. Thunder and lightning crisscrossed around her, but she could not advance an inch. Even though this was an elemental plane where only elemental creatures existed, this woman was able to create a scene of hundreds of flowers blooming around her. She did not even need to use her divine power. Just her existence alone was enough to affect the laws of reality. This was the terror of a rank 10 great god. A newcomer? Lorenza's gaze shifted to Gunan. She carefully examined him for a moment before frowning. What an astonishingly powerful divine body. Gunan smiled and said, I came from that side. He did not explicitly say what that side was, but Lorenza clearly understood. She nodded and did not say anything else. The only difference between gods was that they had different godhoods. There was no such thing as a different cultivation path. There was no god with an especially powerful divine body. Even the fallen god of strength could only withstand 2 more attacks from his divine power. Once he lost his divine power, he would still be useless. However, the heavenly worlds were different. There were cultivators who walked the path of body refinement. The Mountain River World Star-Lord, Ishan, whom Gunan had met before, was actually half a Star-Lord. Lorenza greeted Sylvia again and fell silent. She didn't want to talk to the two of them. This was the goddess of flourishing flowers' personality. Gunan had already expected this, so he did not take it to heart. Not long after Lorenza's arrival, 2 more people quickly arrived. One of them was Sky God Clive, and the other was a Star-Lord. As soon as the Star-Lord saw Gunan, he smiled and said, I was wondering who came from that side and could trap Sylvia. So it's you, Your Excellency Gunan. The person who spoke had the demeanor of an immortal. He was an old man dressed like a Taoist priest. The long white beard on his chin reached his chest. I'm Ling Yangzi from the Xianqing world. Greetings, fellow Taoist. The old Taoist smiled faintly and bowed, looking very approachable. Gunan also greeted him unhurriedly, but he knew very well that this Taoist Ling Yang was not as kind as he looked. The Xianqing world was a relatively rare star realm in the heavenly worlds because the position of its Star-Lord was determined by the sex inheritance. There was Xianqing School in the Xianqing world, and every sect master of Xianqing Dao School was the Star-Lord of the Xianqing world. This Taoist, Ling Yang, was able to win the position of Star-Lord from dozens of generations of his fellow disciples, so he couldn't be a simple person. Since everyone's here, let's begin. Lorenza's calm and emotionless voice interrupted the 2 people's pleasantries. According to the Heavenly God Society's internal procedures, a new member must be recommended by at least 1 official member and must complete an internal commission under the witness of 3 other members. This rule was set when the Heavenly God Society was first established. Its purpose was to show the Heavenly God Society's purpose, which was to help each other and exchange what they needed. Chapter 320. Start of add-on title. End of add-on Titla 1 text chapter 360 Kane's left hand /H1 A style equals color. Hashtag 00F. Ref equals Emil. Next chapter /add a Blillager border equals 0 trit table border equals 0 align equals left trit table border equals 0 align equals left trit table border equals 0 align equals left. TRTD/TR/table. After hearing Gunan's words, Lorencia and the other 2 didn't feel anything. Even a Sky God Clive was considering it seriously. It's not impossible if Sylvia doesn't mind. The 3 of them had only received Sylvia's message and came to witness the new member. They didn't know what happened earlier. Sylvia was the only one who stared at Gunan in a daze, as if she was shocked by his shamelessness. Noticing her expression, Taoist Spirit's son asked curiously, What was your request earlier? Sylvia rolled her eyes and pointed at Gunan. Keep an eye on him. It's not impossible just from the process. The old Taoist smile turned somewhat awkward as he said this. Sure. Clive continued to be serious, and his expression did not even change. The Sky God was one of the most powerful gods, but his personality was too weird. It was said that nobody had ever seen his other expressions. The god of flowers didn't even say a word. She just stared at Gunan silently. The three of them didn't think much of the request in the first place. Any normal god wouldn't be troubled by a request. After all, conflicts between deities were rare in this world. Most requests came from those below the level of deities. For example, Sylvia received Lu Xian's request. Letter. If she hadn't run into Gunan, a regular legendary expert would have been captured by her shadow and wouldn't be released until everything was over. The so-called entrustment process, to put it bluntly, was to give the official members a chance to observe the new member and determine his background and strength. Gunan could be considered a famous junior in the all heavens, so there wasn't much to investigate. So Gunan shrugged and said, "Then am I in?" Lorenza nodded and said, "Yes. There are some principles that Sylvia will tell you. When you return, remember to visit her. Supreme Sword Heaven's Lord Shui-Run," Daoist Spirit's son added with a smile. "That's right," Lorenza added. Clearly, she wasn't too familiar with the division of the heavenly planes. After saying that, she didn't want to stay any longer and left in a hurry. Extreme Sword Heaven's Gu Nin also knew that Star-Lord Shui-Run had just risen in the past tens of thousands of years. He wasn't considered a veteran Star-Lord, but his strength couldn't be underestimated. Shui-Run was called the Sword Saint, which was a title among the Star-Lords. It was self-evident how valuable it was. Many people in the heavenly planes believed that if one day the 13th sky became the 14th sky, the extra one would definitely be Shui-Run. Gunan understood that given Shui-Run's status, he was probably one of the people in charge of the Celestial Gods Association in the heavenly planes. After Lorenza left, Clive didn't linger. He said to Gunan with a straight face, "Welcome, newcomer. If there's a chance, you can come to my divine kingdom as a guest." Although his tone and expression didn't seem like an invitation at all, Gunan knew that this was already a very sincere invitation. Daoist Spirit's son was a little more straightforward. "This old Daoist will be returning to the heavenly planes in a few days. Would you like to come with me?" "I still have something to do." Gunan refused without even thinking about it. He then pointed to himself. Yes, a request. Now he thought of this again. By the time Nan returned to the kingdom of the dead, the belly of Four Seasons Mountain had already become a river of blood. Many forces had fought, almost causing chaos in the entire bloody city. Everything was just as Nan had expected. The Raymond clan had split into two groups. One group went to slaughter the Clear River Pavilion in Bloody City, while the other group went to the belly of Four Seasons Mountain. They had received the news a little later than Lu Xian, so they were naturally more powerful than her. Was she worth the Sword of Death? Was she willing to give him the Sword of Death? Their actions just happened to undo the first seal, and their soaring power immediately exposed both sides, attracting the attention of the entire city. This time, it was the vampires' turn to be unlucky. The various powerhouses who had been attracted over didn't care about the Clear River Pavilion. Instead, they were certain that the seal was definitely opened by the vampires, and they were the most competitive. The Clear River Pavilion had found a breather. Lu Xian, Ji Chun Fu Ba, Heap, Xiao Bai Shun Chu Conscient, the midst of the chaos. The vampires, who were normally very difficult to find, seemed to have become worthless. What's sealed here is Kane's left hand? Sylvia stood on the distant horizon, looking down at the chaotic battle below, but she could still accurately sense the aura within the seal. Kane's left hand, this vampire divine weapon, was still very famous. Even the shadow goddess had heard of it, and it was said to be an item that could slay gods. And then casually replied, then looked at her in confusion. "The three of them have already left. Why are you following me?" Sylvia tilted her head. "I have to explain to you what you need to pay attention to in the organization." Of course, Gunan didn't believe such words, but since she wanted to follow him, he didn't take it to heart. The main reason was that he really wasn't familiar with the shadow goddess, or else he could easily guess what she was thinking. The shadow goddess was really too weak. In the game in his previous life, this kind of god could be killed by a dozen players as soon as they changed classes, and there weren't many good quests on her. so who would have the time to attack her? Of course, Gunan wouldn't have thought that Sylvia wanted to see him fight again because of the laws that he controlled. After thinking for a while, she had already determined that the path that Gunan was walking on was the true, profound meaning of shadow, and that she hadn't made much progress after so many years. She was probably on the wrong path. As the two of them spoke, a red light flashed on the ground. Then, a blood-red coffin slowly emerged and hovered in midair. The coffin didn't have a cover, and the decorations and items inside were revealed. It was an old man wearing a standard knight's suit, but the strange thing was that half of his left hand had been cut off. "Get the left hand!" Countless shouts came from all around, and everyone stopped at the same time, staring at the sky. The first to make a move was Liu Xian. Framed, there was no such rule when it came to using commercial means against people and robbing treasures. Liu Xian, who had been in contact with the planet lords all year round. Zheng, Si Tao Guowan. There was no harm in saying, Si Tao Guowan. She stood alone in front of the coffin, and there was a special domain around her. Any person or attack that came close to her would be folded, twisted, and weakened until it was almost non-existent. Her law wasn't purely commercial, but it was related to it. Liu Xian, Si Tao Guowan, Bo Guowan, Tao Guowan, soybean curd brand, rank saying neon theft. Date, all of you stop. Liu Xian, swollen Wang Guowan, Aoyan, June, Hui, Guowan Gua, Lei, Di, Yu Yuan, Ku. After saying that, she said to the people around her, "Everyone, this divine artifact of the blood race can only be used to its fullest in the hands of the blood race. It's useless for you to take it. As long as you stop today, all the losses will be borne by the Clear River Pavilion." Liu Xian, Si Tao Guowan, Muba Guowan, Old Xiao Miki Guowan. This kind of empty talk wouldn't win anyone's trust, but it could make many people wait and see. Lady Mara was ecstatic and said loudly, "As long as you are willing to return the ancestral weapon, we can agree to any request." Liu Xian, Si Tao Guowan Guowan, Si Tao Guowan Guowan, Ben Yu Xiaomi, Now Wang Guowan, Yin Huang, Yuan Ji and I Long. However, at this moment, she suddenly felt the sunlight behind her dim, as if someone had appeared behind her. Liu Xian, Si Tao Guowan, Chu, Childish Guowan, Bad Gua, Huangya, Huang, Shu Gua. Chui talk about herding pom-pom, herding pit-chopping grass. Chi. This power didn't belong to the mortal world. It was clearly a protective treasure given by Zhong Qinghe. Liu Xian, only you. Punishment? Trouble? Jiao Guowan, 3 Guowan, Guowan, Shu Guolu, Zhu Guowan, Ji Huang Root Song. However, to her surprise, the other party didn't come to snatch it. Instead, he turned and walked toward the coffin. A woman in a long black dress followed him. She seemed to be puzzled by his actions. She asked about Liu Xian. "Is it worth Gu Xiu Wang Guowan? Feng, Yi Temple Jun Jun?" Gunan arrived before the coffin, and with a casual tug, the old man's entire left arm was torn off. Chapter 321. The title starts with ad. End of ad on Titla 1 Chapter 361 Norris. The mirror go to style equals color. Hashtag 00F. Ref equals 568-2515. HTML. Next chapter / add border equals 0. Shirt table border equals 0. Align equals left shirt table border equals 0. Align equals left shirt table border equals 0. Align equals left trtd /tr /table. Kane's left hand was a two-handed staff that could provide a large number of bloodbreed laws and was very suitable for bloodbreed players. That's right, it was a two-handed staff. That was why any player who had seen a picture of this weapon in his previous life would not mistake it for someone else. However, there were still many players who made the mistake when playing the game for the first time. It was precisely because of this that the forums in his previous life were often ridiculed about Kane's left hand. There were even people who deliberately misled newbies to satisfy their own evil interests. As a veteran player of many years, Gunan would never forget this detail. After listening to Gunan's words, Sylvia took a closer look at the arm, but she didn't notice anything special. This was inconceivable to her. After all, even in such a chaotic battlefield, She could clearly sense the aura within the seal. Now that the seal had been broken and Cain's body was right in front of him, why couldn't he be sure that there was anything special about his left hand? However, Gunan was very clear about the reason. He casually said, "Look at this hand carefully. Is there anything wrong with it?" Sylvia lowered her head and looked at it for a long time, but she still couldn't see anything. She looked at Gunan in confusion. Gunan was worried about the shadow goddess's intelligence as he casually waved his hand. Luxian is the seed embedded in the heart of a stranger who will grow weary in the end. Oval-shaped Benignojonia. Immature this scene made Luxian's heart tremble. Roasted pudding? Leech? Chong Miao. Xiong 3. Put the dice, obediently remonstrated in the vat, and hoped for a good harvest. At last the scabbard fades from the bridge, and the four fresh and young. If he could take away half of the palm, then he could naturally take away his heart and even his head. In other words, the talisman that his Star-Lord had personally left for him was completely useless in front of this person. After realizing this, Luxian was stunned. Tossing Qinghu Tartar to play with, hale and hearty, stirring up the Chunchan puppet to suppress the heat? Is it a drought or a fever? Arena no, it couldn't be said to be falling out. At most, it was an adult bullying a child. Not to mention, Luxian? What about the man in the crowd? Huh? Blowing the front door? Zhongpu? Polypus? Toss aside the delicacies. Take the palanquin and wait on the perch. This half of the palm was actually not the same as the arm. It wasn't that someone was substituting someone else. Both of them were indeed things that should be hidden, but the left and right sides weren't quite right. Sylvia took a closer look and realized that the arm was indeed a left hand, but the palm with 4 fingers was clearly a right hand. The shadow goddess turned her head in disbelief and looked at the corpse in the coffin, but the right hand of the corpse was still a right hand. 2 right hands? Cain died at the hands of the mirror deity. Gunan saw that she finally understood, so he used the simplest sentence to express his meaning clearly. Mirror god Norris, a mid-level deity whose abilities were only at the 8th level, but he had once thrown the entire world of gods into chaos, and was the fuse that ignited the 4th war of the gods. Any deity who had lived through that period would not be unfamiliar with the name Norris. Sylvia was the younger sister of the god of light and justice, and was born almost at the same time as him. She was also one of the oldest deities, so of course she would know the mirror deity. It was also because of this that she deeply understood how strange Norris' power was. Through the law of mirrors, he could project an object into the image in the mirror, and even create a corresponding object in the world of the mirror. He could do it with objects, people, and even deities. In the end, the insane Norris tried to replicate the entire world, which incurred the wrath of the masses. However, Norris wasn't a fool. He had roped in a group of deities beforehand, which eventually led to the outbreak of the 4th War of the Gods. Cain had died at the hands of Norris, so it wasn't too difficult to understand that a section of his left hand had been reflected by the mirror. Sylvia had even imagined that a mirror had appeared in front of Cain, and he had tried to run out of its range. But in the end, a section of his left hand had been cut off. Fortunately, Norris had been missing for tens of thousands of years. As her thoughts returned from her imagination, Sylvia heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, she suddenly realized that if this fellow called Gunan was so knowledgeable about everything, then what was he going to do with Cain's left hand? An inexplicable fear surfaced in her heart. She looked up abruptly, but realized that Gunan had already disappeared. "Fine, Gunan, I don't care what you do." Sylvia sat in the blood club, with vampire princes from the blood breeds and powerhouses from other forces below her. But at this moment, they all bowed respectfully. "Yes, your highness." Faced with a true deity, they had no reason or right to refuse. Even if Sylvia belonged to the light god system, and many of them were backed by the dark god, but a neutral plane was a neutral plane, and protection was not faith. Furthermore, it wasn't during the War of the Gods, and the relationship between the 2 major god systems wasn't as tense as imagined. Sylvia and the sky god were both from the light god system, but the goddess of flowers was from the dark god system. When the 3 of them had met earlier, it had been a harmonious atmosphere, and they didn't seem to have any intention of fighting. Sitting in the hall, Sylvia's expression was very solemn. She still couldn't be sure what Gunnan's objective was, but if she couldn't find any traces of Gunnan after a long time, she would choose to send the news back to the light god system, or even her brother. She wasn't making a mountain out of a molehill, but the lunatic Norris was simply too terrifying, and she couldn't take him too seriously. However, what Sylvia didn't expect was that after just a few days, Gunnan's whereabouts would be reported to her. This fellow had no intention of hiding at all, and had just swaggered into the blood club, and was even peeking at the embrace. Pervert. Sylvia didn't hesitate to use this word to describe Gunnan, and her gaze showed that she indeed thought so in her heart. The embrace of the blood breeds was even more secretive than the process of mating. After all, mating was only for mutual pleasure, and the embrace was the true way to develop offspring, and vampires couldn't get pregnant. However, Gunnan didn't just watch. He even participated in it personally. Don't be mistaken. He participated by dripping the golden origin blood in his hand into Zhong Dai's body. The process of Zhong Dai's blood feeding was much faster than Gunnan had expected. Previously, when Gunnan had gotten Kane's left hand, he hadn't had the chance to chat with Sylvia for long before he realized that Zhong Dai was already prepared for the embrace. This extremely unique blood fetishist was indeed a natural candidate for the blood breeds. As she had been drinking blood for a long time, her digestive system had long gotten used to this eating habit, to the point where she had to mix normal food with blood in order to properly digest and absorb it. For a human with a normal bloodline to be able to torment herself to this extent, Zhong Dai really wasn't an ordinary person. Chapter 322. Start of ad. End of ADH1 text chapter 362 finding the door / H1 A style equals color. Hashtag 00F. Ref equals ML. Next chapter / add a Blillager border equals 0 table border equals 0 align equals left table border equals 0 align equals left table border equals 0 align equals left. TRTD /TR /table Christina was a girl with long brown hair and a face that wasn't too hard. Mobile phones didn't have ads, so it was a good idea to save data. She had just embraced Zhong Dai, so her face was still a little pale, but she still looked at Gunnan and Sylvia, who had just appeared, warily. "Who are you?" Christina looked at the two of them, but her hands didn't move much. These two people who could appear in front of her without a sound were obviously not simple. Christina's voice was very crisp, as if she were a real girl. Gunnan also knew that she wasn't very old, and was one of the few young vampires. If the players did not intervene, she would become the future leader of the Raymond clan, and lead this clan of vampires to serve under a powerful god. She would even be involved in the final Divine War. But right now, she was just a little girl who hadn't even reached the legendary realm. "Don't worry, I'm her friend." Gunnan smiled and pointed at Zhong Dai, who was lying unconscious on the bed, her body emitting a strong smell of blood. Sylvia noticed the blood bottle in Gunnan's hand and asked in confusion, "This is the origin of the vampires?" The origin of the vampires was, of course, the blood of their ancestors. Yes. Gunnan nodded casually, knowing that the other party was confused about the origin of this thing. And Sylvia took a deep breath and said, "You'll kill her. Using the origin of the vampires on a normal person is incompatible." Gunnan glanced at her, but didn't say anything. He had heard the phrase incompatible physique many times in the game, so he was no stranger to it. This was because the blood race's origin was something specially prepared for players. The natives didn't have the fortune to enjoy it. If he were to ask the gods, he would get the answer, his constitution is incompatible. In fact, if it wasn't for the fact that this route was for players to change their class to the blood tribe, there wouldn't have been 2 foreign blood tribe members. Now that Gunnan had used it on Zhong Dai, he wanted to try and get Zhong Dai to walk the path of a player. If this step of hers was feasible, Gunnan even wanted to do the same and create more main character NPCs. This was not the only way for players to change their class in his mind. Of course, the natives wouldn't be able to play the game as it was meant for players. If the natives of the Pantheon world could not do it, then what about the people from a heavenly world? Gunan stared at Zhong Dai's face, his gaze deep and even somewhat expectant. As for the risk he was taking to experiment on a little girl like Zhong Dai, this was not within Gunan's consideration. After all, he wasn't the one taking the risk. After an unknown amount of time, Zhong Dai's breathing was still steady, but she showed no signs of waking up. She had been unconscious for far longer than a normal blood tribe's embrace. As she had not eaten for a long time, Zhong Dai's lips were already chapped. Sylvia was very sure that the origin could not be fused with a normal person. It's no use. She'll die soon. Under normal circumstances, she would have died long ago. Gunan said with certainty. Even a legendary blood tribe's first embrace wouldn't last more than half an hour on average. The word average made Sylvia frown, as if she had heard countless bloody words. After a while, Gunan's wait was not in vain. Zhong Dai actually woke up. Her gaze was slightly dazed as she looked around in confusion, as if she had no idea where she was. Without saying a word, Gunan waved his hand and cut Zhong Dai's arm with a shadow blade. The latter immediately bled profusely. But what was surprising was that her blood was actually dark gold in color. It's done. Gunan's heart skipped a beat. Using the body of a native of the myriad worlds could indeed break the biological boundaries of NPCs. The excruciating pain woke her up, and Zhong Dai immediately shrieked and hurriedly pulled her hand back. Then, she discovered to her surprise that the wound on her arm had already stopped bleeding, and the wound was even showing signs of forming a scab. As expected of a blood tribe, Zhong Dai exclaimed, thinking that it was because of the body of a blood tribe. Christina, however, widened her eyes. As a blood tribe member, she knew better than anyone that a newly born vampire could not possibly have such an ability. In the following days, Gunan swaggered into the blood club and trained Zhong Dai every day, as well as testing her various data. The final conclusion was that Zhong Dai's fusion with the blood tribe's origin was very successful. She was almost no different from a player, except that she lacked the body of an evil god. On the other hand, because Kane's left hand was still in Gunan's hands, the Raymond clan welcomed him with open arms. Of course, if it wasn't for the terrifying power he had shown earlier, the blood tribe wouldn't have welcomed him like this. Facing a great figure who was suspected to be a god, even the Raymond clan didn't dare to say anything threatening. They only hoped to use their resources to exchange for their ancestors' weapon, or wait until Gunan was in a good mood and give them this divine weapon. In fact, Gunan had already rejected more than 20 blood tribe members, all of whom came to his door and threw themselves into his arms. The blood tribe had always had this tradition of using their good looks to their advantage. Fortunately, more than half of those who came to his door were women. Gunan tested Zhong Dai in all aspects, including her physical strength, recovery ability, speed, law acuity, and even her appearance. He evaluated all of them one by one. These data were strictly recorded, fully showing the entire process of Zhong Dai's body being transformed by the blood tribe's origin. Until 2 months later, Zhong Dai had almost become a different person. She now had a head of long blonde hair, fair and flawless skin, and charming brown pupils. Even her height had increased by a few centimeters, making her look tall and well-proportioned. This appearance would probably make Lu Xin D. Chu Jiaduan Gunan. On this day, Gunan was still training little Zhong Dai as usual, when suddenly there was a commotion outside. What happened? Zhong Dai asked impatiently before Gunan could react. Zhong Dai was tortured by Gunan's training plan, and she couldn't wait for something to happen. What happened has nothing to do with you. Christina extinguished Zhong Dai's fantasy with a bucket of cold water. As Zhong Dai's senior, she would occasionally come to supervise Zhong Dai's training. Zhong Dai couldn't help but pout, but Gunan smiled and said, "This time, it really has something to do with her." Outside the blood club, Lu Xian, Tu, Jing, she was afraid of Yin, Kong Kue Gui Si I do. Fourth cleansing. Ms. Mara didn't like the clear river pavilion at all. She sneered and said, "It depends on whether the master wants to see you or not." Lu Xian, Xing, AI. The Emperor invaded the soft pole. Giant clam, herding reef, chisel moraine. For the sake of these two people, I believe you'll be willing to give me this opportunity. Chapter 323. Add on the title begins. Add on the title inch 1 text chapter 363 result /H1 A style equals color. Hashtag 00F. Ref equals iml. Next chapter /add a bleelager border equals 0 table border equals 0 align equals left table border equals 0 align equals left table border equals 0 align equals left. TRTD/TR/table outside the blood club. The atmosphere had already sunk into a strange silence. None of the vampires present recognized Shauna and Violet Lightning. Needless to say, although Shauna was a member of the Raymond clan, she was classified as a defector. Before she defected, she was nothing more than a transparent person without any sense of existence. And being unable to recognize the identity of the two meant that they couldn't proceed with the next step of the plan. Lady Mara was already somewhat regretful. If she had known earlier, she wouldn't have personally come out to deal with Liu Xin in order to curry favor with that person. Utmost forgiveness if the one receiving them was just a junior. Then she wouldn't have even thought about letting them in. At worst, she would be tricked by the other party once, and it wouldn't be a loss of face. But she was standing here. If she let Liu Xin in, paper, fat, Hydra, for heroes hurrying to the river to stop, protect, pry, yin, rely on the banana, clean up the scene. Vampires were a very special race. In private, they could do unimaginably despicable acts, but in front of others, they were incomparably mindful of their face. Liu Xin, Ji Chuang Hui Hui, Miao Mu Cunning, Wan Nai, Cool, Huang Bai Gu Bao, worrying in bed. Is the Mirage afraid of Yin Yin? But the giant clam, she could not help but feel anxious. Only the heavens knew what kind of price the Clear River Pavilion had paid in order to stall young girl Wu Gui. To put it bluntly, Liu Xin, asking her out on a date, and saying she's a man? Huang Ben Lai, scratching my head, Yin? Ka, however, her action saved Ms. Mara the trouble. Anyway, the movement had already been made, so it was reasonable for her to take the opportunity to inform Gunan. What is it? Gunan arrived faster than they expected. He was accompanied by a blonde girl who stood behind him with a reserved expression. I finally get to see you, Liu Xin. Cut the hair. A pet? She knew that the person in front of her had the ability to kill her easily, but she had come here with the determination to die, so she was not afraid. If he didn't even have the courage to face death, how could he bring Zhong Dai back? Liu Xin? Was he suffering from an evil spirit? Making a pact? Liao. Corpses fall to the ground and leave the palanquin. Radon, Jin Jin, instantly changing the mountain. Sang Ku. What the hell? Worried about Yong, Yi's milk ping, Jiao Gui, glimpsed the armor model, pretended to be a bad person. Milk? Teach the teacher to warn the corridor. As he said this, Liu Xin judged Neon. Ku. There was no one in this world without a weakness. Although Gu Nan was terrifyingly strong, as long as he wanted something, there would be a weakness. Liu Xin? Was he? Yongyi's grave? Was he? She followed Gu Nan all the way to the world of gods, believing that he needed Wu Gui and Violet Lightning's help. On the other hand, she investigated Gu Nan's behavior in Blood City. From a flower-selling girl to Shauna, it was only logical that Shauna was also captured. If even these two could not move Gu Nan, then Liu Xin, loyal to Chi-Chi, Alpha Priest Chi-Chi, Chase, Liu Xin, Zhong Xin squatting tidy, Zheng, Mei Yong, E can resist misfortune beating Sishi skeleton Dadash, Ku, embrace, D, Yongshu, Yongyi, Shui Shua Tiaowen, Qimang, Kuyong, Liu Xin, questioning D, Chi-Chi Huan, Si Xiaolina, Scandium, Wan with Jia invading skeleton aperture is like W chanting oyster sac Huan Si, Ing, Kaji, Song, Jijia Wan Ting, but she did not expect that Gu Nan's response was to turn around and pat the blonde girl's shoulder. Go and say hello. Following Gunan's voice, Lu, Xian, Locust making trouble, Sister Lu. The blonde girl, Zhong Dai, called out with her still crisp voice as if nothing had happened. She even skipped over to Lu Xian, young Jijia. Zhong Dai, who had grown taller, was already shorter than Lu Xian, only hanging. Qi Ping Huang, Qili Luo, Baisu Mujia, Wu Jiao Senayang Le, Vinegar, Lu Xian, Zhong, Ji Pan Punishment, Vinegar Pangya, Qi, right? Making trouble? Yuan Chu Ji Chao Kuju, Shi, Yi Ping Huang Jijia, scratching white mark? You went through with the embrace? She asked, dumbfounded. Yes. Zhong Dai still had an innocent look on her face. Even Gu Nan did not expect that Zhong Dai would be able to prepare for the embrace so quickly. Lu Xian, comparable to Huan, kissing and teasing Pry, poking the roundworm and howling boat choice. She was stuck at this point for almost 2 months. Only with this much time, she could make sufficient preparations and snatch the purple lightning away. But now, Zhong Dai only used 2 words to shatter all her calculations and plans. It was like a bolt from the blue. How could this be? Student Lu's mind was a mess, and she did not know what to say. Let's go and continue training. Gunan's unhurried words could be heard. Zhong Dai, who did not have time to reminisce, could only purse her lips and walk back obediently. Ever since she woke up, she had never disobeyed Gunan's orders. Gunan's words were more effective than Christina's. This was a very normal thing. Christina was her direct predecessor, and Gunan was the one who channeled the origin blood into her. From the perspective of vampires, if Gunan was her biological father, Christina could only be a surrogate mother, or even a test tube. No, Lu Xian, suffocating locusts? Fashi Che is lying? Third, flounder? Out she grabbed Zhong Dai's wrist and said in a low voice, even if you have accepted the embrace, I still have to bring you back. Maybe, Lu Xian, be on duty at the screen, raking the Mongols and cursing the horses? Bad worker Hua Uranium, scratching the white beard leisurely? Xiaozong, remonstrance? Zhu Zhong, Ingche, ditch collision? Her hand that was holding Zhong Dai's hand was also pushed away by those tentacles, and then she quickly fell into the shadows. Lu Xian, who had been dragged to the ground and whose entire body had disappeared into the shadows. Zheng, Huang'o kidnapped Pakhan obediently and brought him to school, stirring Su Pao desolate arc with even wind. Why? Could it be that he didn't care about their lives at all? Lu Xian, pouring water on a mound? Playing? Leech? What? What the F asterisk CK? This extremely strange scene made everyone's scalp go numb. Even the vampires had never seen such a way of killing. What was even more strange was that not long after, a black shadow started to move in the shadows and quickly formed a new human figure. What is the method to remove the goo? Gunan asked casually. The shadow started to report the dishes dutifully: blue heartgrass, silver moon hoarfrost, eagle's hind claw. Ever since his first-class advancement, Gunan rarely used the rule of rebirth, but that didn't mean he didn't know how to use it. On the contrary, as his strength grew, the rule of rebirth was much more effective when used on low-level opponents. He could inherit most of the memories from when he was alive. Of course, it was almost completely useless on gods. This is also an application of the shadows. Sylvia's figure appeared beside Gunan and looked at the shadow, servant, in surprise. Chapter 324. Start with add on the title. End with add on the title. 1 text chapter 364 save money /H1 A style equals color. Hashtag 00F. Ref equals Emil. Next chapter /add a Blillager border equals 0. Trit table border equals 0. Align equals left. Trit table border equals 0. Align equals left. Trit table border equals 0. Align equals left. TRTD/TR/table. Sylvia had been following Gunan all this time. She was still worried that Gunan might have some ulterior motives for the mirror god. After knowing that Gunan was going to use Kane's left hand soon, she decided to follow him and see what Gunan was going to do with it. On the other hand, she was also very curious about the other Shadow Master. In the end, The heavens did not disappoint those who waited. Sylvia had managed to wait until Gu-nin made his move, and his first move was a power that she had never seen before. The power of shadows can also be used to create life? Sylvia muttered. Her mind was already filled with the term shadow revival that Gu-nin coined, and there was no room for anything else. Gu-nin smiled strangely. He didn't mind giving Sylvia the wrong path. After all, whether the shadow goddess was on the right path or wrong path, she wouldn't make any progress even after tens of thousands of years. Maybe if he gave her a nonsensical path, she would be able to open up a whole new world. Gu-nin shook his head and left Lady Mara with Purple Lightning and Shauna, asking her to help him find the antidote. Luxian, is it worth the octagonal? Gadaman's Edge Emperor's Cliff Chi? Both? Muo, Injian. But it didn't matter. There were more of these in the Clear River Pavilion. He could just find some people to test the antidote on. 2 days. He could make it in time. Of course, Gu-nin didn't know whether the information was detailed or not, but he didn't really care about their lives. The Purple Lightning was just a bonus. Of course, it would be best if Shauna could survive. If not, Gu-nin still had Christina as a substitute. He was not indispensable. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that they were in a hurry, a traditional genius like Christina would be more suitable to be the head of the family than Shauna in terms of personality and prestige. Gu-nin didn't have to wait too long. After a short 2 days, Purple Bolt and Shauna, both in perfect condition, stood in front of Gu-nin. The Raymond clan was quite capable, especially when they needed Gu-nin's help. At the same time, Wu Gui, who had not been seen for a long time, also rushed over. No Return was in a sorry state. Her exquisite Kasaya was somewhat damaged, and she had even put away the lotus seat she was sitting on. She had rushed over on foot. The foundation of the Clear River realm was not to be underestimated. Zheng, turbulence, time, Wei Mo Yin Zheng, drumming Gorgon offering smoke palm neon. You sure are comfortable. You left us in Skeleton City and then fell out with the people of the Clear River realm. No Return looked at the calm expression on Gu-nin's face and immediately became angry. With her and the Purple Lightning's patience, waiting for 2 months was nothing. However, the people of the Clear River Pavilion suddenly attacked them, which was really unexpected. It could be said that Gu-nin's act of kidnapping Zhong Dai had indirectly caused trouble for the two of them. However, Gu-nin shrugged and didn't take it to heart. He never cared what others thought. As long as it didn't affect his plan, he didn't care who died. You're here just in time. I sent these vampires to investigate the holy tomb of the undead. We'll set off once there's a result, Gu-nin said to No Return. In his original plan, he was going to use the vampires to find the entrance to the holy tomb. Luxian, loyal as a fish. Let's wait. I hope we don't have to wait too long this time. Wu Gui couldn't do anything about him and could only say this. Gu-nin naturally ignored her. His daily work was still to train Zhong Dai. Oh, and now there was one more thing, which was to help Shauna run for clan leader. Because the Raymond clan still had the God of Steel behind them, if Gu-nin didn't want to completely expose himself here, he couldn't directly kidnap everyone. The way he helped Shauna was also very simple. He gave her Kane's left hand. As soon as Shauna received this magic staff, she fused her own blood source with it, making this divine artifact her own. From then on, unless she died, she was the only one who could use this staff. This was a huge advantage in the election. The ancestral staff could directly increase the purity of the blood of the vampires and indirectly increase the strength of the vampires. Now that it was in Shauna's hands, even if the entire clan could use it, only Shauna could use it. And with so many people in the clan, they would have to line up, right? Shauna, as the owner of the divine artifact, would undoubtedly have the greatest say in who would use it first and who would use it the longest. Even if she treated everyone equally on the surface, it was very easy for her to tamper with the operation. As the days passed, Shauna's position in the Raymond clan became more and more stable, and the voice of becoming the next clan leader also became louder and louder. At this time, an entrance to the holy tomb of the undead was found. The holy tomb of the undead was indeed a very mysterious place. Not only did it have 9 entrances, but each one was constantly changing. Almost every once in a while, they would appear in different locations. Gunan's luck was good this time. One of the entrances was not far from the Bloody City, and with his speed, he could reach it in 2 days. Yorktown was also the place where the holy tomb of the undead was found this time. 3 figures slowly appeared at the entrance of the town. "It's on that mountain," said a young man in a white robe among the 3. Beside him were 2 women. One was wearing a golden robe, but her expression was as cold as frost. The other was wearing a black dress, and her eyes kept wandering around. The 3 quickly walked toward the mountain peak, and someone immediately came to stop them at the foot of the mountain. "Who are you? In front is—" Before they could finish their questions, the young man in the white robe lightly waved his hand, and they were all swallowed into the shadows. These 3 were naturally Gunan's party. He had brought Girl No Return to the holy tomb of the undead, and Sylvia had also followed. So cruel. Sylvia shook her head, expressing her opinion of Gunan's actions. Girl No Return looked at her doubtfully. In the former's eyes, this person was obviously a Star Lord, and really shouldn't be so sentimental. Gunan only smiled. He understood that the gods of the world of gods had a closer relationship with mortals than Star Lords. After all, they still needed faith. This entrance to the holy tomb of the undead was obviously not the first to be discovered by Gunan. On the way up the mountain, there were people guarding along the way. However, news of a powerful enemy attack spread very quickly, and after a few waves of people died at Gunan's hands, no one else dared to stop them. When Gunan's party reached the top of the mountain, they saw a cave entrance that flickered with faint fluorescent light. It was already surrounded by a group of powerhouses of various types. This was obviously not the publicly recognized entrance, so everyone was blocked outside. At the same time, there were also those who did not give up and tried to use their own methods to crack it. Gunan merely glanced at the sign outside the cave, then smiled at Girl No Return and said, "You're quite lucky." No Return's luck was indeed quite good. They had randomly found an entrance that corresponded to the tomb of the living dead. Perhaps Gunan's words were heard by some of the people around them, as someone immediately surrounded them and said with a smile, "Do the 3 of you want to try and crack the entrance puzzle? You only need to pay 300 divine power coins each." Sylvia looked at this person speechlessly. She did not expect that even a holy tomb of the undead that they could not open could become a way to rake in money. However, she did not care about this bit of divine power coins. A place like the holy tomb of the undead was obviously better for them to sneak in. Meanwhile, Gunan continued to walk forward, and the man who came up to speak to him did not mind. He only smiled and blocked Gunan's path. The few chambers of commerce working together to control the entrance was enough to bully ordinary powerhouses. If it were a true powerhouse, they would not care about this bit of money. After all, the fewer people who knew about the holy tomb of the undead, the better. He believed that no one would be willing to publicize this place. However, in the next moment, his head flew into the sky and fell heavily to the ground at the side, whereas Gunan didn't even spare a glance at him. Chapter 325. 1 Second Genius? Question mark. Dicho Boluin? Question mark. Question mark. Question mark. Question mark. Who are the 3 of you? The holy tomb is guarded by the 4 of us. What do you want? We are, of course, Gunan was not interested in who was guarding the holy tomb. After all, his target was the inside of the tomb, and it had nothing to do with the people guarding outside. Gunan almost killed his way in. In the end, Sylvia couldn't stand it anymore and revealed a trace of divine aura. From then on, no one dared to make any noise. However, they had a new curiosity. Who on earth would be interested in the holy tomb of the undead? No matter how legendary a necromancer was, he was still immortal. How could he be worthy of the arrival of a god? In a place like the kingdom of the undead, it was very likely that a god would come, not just a saint. Gunan ignored these people's attitude. He came to the entrance of the holy tomb and formed a strange mark with shadow force, which landed on the entrance of the cave. The mark combined perfectly with the original mark at the entrance and formed a brand new inscription. Then, Gunan waved his hand lightly, splitting the inscription into 2 and casting it to the sides. The fluorescent light at the entrance of the cave gradually dimmed. It was not until Gunan and the other two entered that Gunan closed the door. That's the Tardonian language? After entering the holy tomb, Sylvia searched her memory and found out what the inscription was. It was the superposition of the words life and death in the Tardonian language. To be precise, it's the ancient Tardonian language. Gunan said casually, the Count of the Living Dead, Furson, was a Tardonian. He left the inscription himself. Furson was from the Middle Ages, and the language he used was considered an ancient language. However, in Sylvia's eyes, there was no difference between ancient and modern. She had existed long before the Tardonians appeared. The entrance to the Tomb of the Living Dead was the easiest one to solve among the 9 entrances. To put it bluntly, it was just a superposition of the 2 inscriptions with some lines removed. As long as he knew that Filson was from Tatton City and could guess the general idea of this mechanism, it would not be difficult to solve the puzzle. The young girl No Return remained silent, but her gaze gradually focused as she cautiously looked around. According to Gunan, what she needed was here. However, her caution was basically useless because Gunan knew this place as well as his own backyard. The Tettonians were famous for their necromancy technology. They were alchemists among the necromancers, so there were a lot of alchemy products in Felson's tomb. Traps, stone statues, and even alchemy maids, a whole bunch of things that could not be seen in the heavenly worlds appeared in front of Gunan and the others. But apparently, they were all paper tigers. Under Gunan's wise leadership, the 3 of them did not even pause. They reached the deepest part of the tomb as if they were taking a stroll. It's here. Gunan pointed at the coffin on the ground and said. Felson's coffin was very strange. The left and right sides were different. The left side was made of dark redwood, while the right side was made of some kind of special crystal. Felson is half alive and half dead. Half of his body is human, but the other half is undead and remains in this state. Gunan knew Felson's condition like the back of his hand. The living dead Felson was a legendary character in the background of the game. He was not inferior to Sandro, the necromancer who was worshipped as a demigod by the people. When Felson was alive, he almost single-handedly dominated the world. His undead empire controlled half of the continent. Although he lost to the Lionheart Queen, it was not his fault. Sandro, on the other hand, was praised highly by the people, but his territory was only the size of 3 dukedoms at most. Most of his achievements were in academics. Sandro could be said to be the first person to promote necromancy magic since ancient times. He had set 7 or 8 milestones in different fields. No Return was not interested in the history of the world of Pantheon. Her gaze was fixed on the coffin, which Gunan had already opened. Just as he said, a corpse that was obviously different from the left and right sides was placed in front of the 3. Should I take his origin? No Return looked at Felson's corpse and asked after some thought. She no longer doubted that this person had the maximum of fusion that she wanted, but she was not sure how to extract it. He's been dead for almost 100,000 years. What origin would he have? Gunan rolled his eyes and said, just take the coffin away. But be careful. The corpse will rot quickly after leaving the holy tomb. No Return did not refute and nodded silently. She was not worried about the rot. The holy tomb of the undead could protect corpses. So could she. After getting Felson's corpse, Gunan did not waste any more time and walked towards the back of the tomb. Norris has been asleep for so many years. It's time to wake him up, Gunan mumbled as he walked. Sylvia perked up and pointed at Gunan. You really want to wake Norris up? Gunan turned around and smiled. I've never denied it. Sylvia's expression darkened when she heard Gunan's words. Since you know Norris is here, you should announce the news. Norris is the enemy of all the gods, unless... Do you want to work with him? This shadow goddess was indeed very imaginative. Gunan could not help but say, I'll kill him. In terms of status, Gunan was more worthy of being the enemy of all the gods than the mirror goddess. After all, he was born while Norris was acquired. However, for the sake of Gunan's sin points, the mirror goddess had to suffer a little and become his experience points. Sylvia did not say anything else, but her eyes wandered. Clearly, she did not believe what Gunan said, or at least, she did not believe that he had the ability to do so. She was already thinking that if Norris was really alive, and Gunan was killed by him, she would definitely escape as soon as possible and spread the news. If not for the fact that the Holy Tomb of the Undead was such a special place, she would even go out and spread the news. But she also knew that Gunan would not let her go out right now. After taking 2 steps, she saw Gunan suddenly stop. He took out Cain's left hand, which he took from Shauna, and stabbed it into the ground. Gunan's power was so terrifying that he actually made a hole in the Holy Tomb, which was made of countless mysterious runes. Cain's left hand, which was slightly withered, seemed to be on the verge of breaking. But that was enough. An inexplicable aura circulated inside the Holy Tomb. Then, a faint sigh was heard. I didn't expect that someone would really find this place. Norris. Sylvia recognized the voice immediately. It was young, calm, but with a hint of madness. Chapter 326. Genius in 1 second. Live? Dichilwan? Champagne? Mound? The location of Norris's hiding place was something that many gods had tried to investigate, but to no avail. Even Sylvia didn't expect that he had been hiding in an abandoned main plain all this time, and in a place like the Holy Undead Tomb that countless people had been searching for over and over again. Perhaps this was the darkest place. When too many adventurers were blinded by the treasures in the Holy Tomb of the Undead, they naturally would not pay attention to other tombs, let alone the gaps between the tombs. In fact, Norris had hidden very well. The place where he was hiding was just a spot in the Holy Tomb. If he had not broken the tomb bit by bit, no one would have discovered him. On the other hand, the people who came to search had to guess where he was and use the law of mirror that he had left behind in order to break the mirror barrier and awaken his remnant soul in advance. These 2 conditions were indispensable, and it was almost the most perfect defense. But what Norris did not expect was that someone still found his location. Of course, the NPCs would not understand that there was a group of people called players. When they were bored, they liked to dismantle the entire world for fun. And as they dismantled, they discovered that there was a god hiding here. Then, they analyzed his origin and thought of a way to awaken him. Norris was a scholarly man with a pair of transparent glasses. His short, silver-gray hair covered half of his forehead, and he held a thin book in his hand. "You're the one who awakened me." Norris's gaze fell on Gunan. He seemed calm and composed, without any hint of madness. Just from appearance alone, no one could connect Norris with his image in the world. Sylvia tightly pursed her lips, and her nerves were already tense. As long as Norris made a move, she would immediately take action. Norris was already used to her behavior, but Gunan's expression was still calm, which made him a little curious. "What's your purpose in awakening me?" "Oh, no need to answer. Let me guess. Borrow my power? For me to find some old guys from back then? Or..." Norris had a charming smile on his face and said word by word, "You want to continue what I've left undone?" He didn't mention the possibility of getting rid of the scourge for the people. If that was the case, there shouldn't be just 3 people coming. Sylvia quickly turned her head and stared at Gunan nervously, fearing that he would say yes. Gunan didn't disappoint her. He didn't even bother to respond to Norris. He patted the girl's shoulder and said, "You go first." Gunan's attitude stunned Norris and the Shadow Goddess at the same time. No matter how loathsome Norris was, or how many disasters he had caused, he was still an influential figure in the world of gods. Whether they hated him, mocked him, or praised him, no one could ignore his existence, but Gunan did it. It was hard for them to understand. To Gunan, Norris was just a monster. No matter how rich their background was, no matter how legendary their experiences were, they were still monsters, and monsters were meant to be killed. Like Gunan, there was another person who could ignore Norris. She did not even recognize this person in front of her. But the coffin of the living dead was already in her hands, and she didn't mind fulfilling her promise. Thus, she attacked without hesitation. Her palms imbued with the dual intents of the devil and Buddha were directly imprinted in front of Norris. Norris laughed involuntarily. He raised the book in his hand, and a silver mirror appeared in front of him. In her line of sight, the mirror in front of her reflected her clearly. The closer she got, the clearer the palm imprint in the mirror became. When she hit the mirror, the force that was almost identical to her own hit her without any resistance. The silver mirror shattered in an instant, and she let out a muffled groan. No one would feel good after going all out against her. Norris just smiled and didn't say anything. He had seen too many opponents like this in his tens of thousands of years of war. Even though he had just awakened from a seal, he wasn't. Another cloud of silver mist exploded in front of Norris. Another mirror had been shattered. This time, it was Gunan who attacked. Gunan's fist was covered in blood. One could even see his white bones, but he didn't seem to feel anything. Norris narrowed his eyes. One after another, silver mirrors were placed in front of him, but they were all shattered by Gunan one after another. When the two of them faced each other, Norris suddenly revealed a faint smile. A frameless thin mirror appeared behind him. The thin mirror reflected Norris's figure. When Gunan's fist landed, it directly shattered Norris's body. But in the mirror, he was still unharmed. Gunan didn't even pause for a moment before he punched the mirror again. The terrifying sound of impact rang out again. The thin mirror was also shattered, and a wound appeared on Gunan's hand. It quickly healed, but Norris obviously couldn't be killed so easily. It's useless. His voice began to show obvious madness. You can kill one, but what about hundreds of me? Following Norris's words, hundreds of mirrors appeared in front of Gunan. In the center of each mirror was Norris's figure. Gunan just laughed silently. His figure instantly rushed into the mirror. At the same time, he said, "The two of you, guard the center." Sylvia and No Return didn't dare to be negligent. Very quickly, they arrived at the center of the hundreds of mirrors. What they saw next made them dumbfounded. After entering the mirror, Gunan was like an agile monkey. He shuttled back and forth between the mirrors as he quickly killed hundreds of Norris. "You're not a god." Norris's crazed voice contained an indescribable meaning. The mirror world was his foundation. He could change the laws within it at will. Any god that fell into it would inevitably be restricted. Even the god of light and justice wouldn't be able to display even half of his strength in a world formed purely by the laws of darkness. But this was meaningless to Gunan, because he was completely using his own body. He wasn't affected by any laws at all. It was also because of this that Norris was certain that he wasn't a god. No god would have such a powerful body. Gunan smiled and didn't say anything. If this was in the game, his identity as an evil god might have been seen through. Fortunately, there was a world here. The god's understanding of the world was far from deep. Moreover, there were indeed people who cultivated their bodies there. Norris didn't have time to think too much. Having just awakened, he was in the weakest state he had ever been in. Facing an enemy that understood him very well, he could only choose to escape. He instantly escaped from the mirror world. Sylvia's reaction was extremely fast. In an instant, a shadow divine power descended. Furthermore, she used the power of her divine kingdom. She was already using her full strength. The young lady No Return also revealed her true form. She was half Buddha and half demon. 8 weapons landed on Norris's body at the same time. Norris's expression didn't change. Since he dared to escape, he was naturally prepared to deal with these two. A weak god and a mere demigod. Norris's figure suddenly froze. He looked up in shock, only to see a Buddhist staff flashing with astonishing golden light. A true god. Even Sylvia couldn't help but look at No Return. She didn't expect that this person's strength wasn't that much weaker than hers. Norris had miscalculated. This was going to be troublesome. In reality, it wasn't that it was troublesome. Rather, if Norris was blocked for even an instant, he would undoubtedly die. In the eyes of countless gods, the mysterious, powerful, and insane Norris was only a level 8 god monster in Gunan's eyes. Just like how he had destroyed his clones, Gunan's punch landed on Norris's head. This extremely weak level 8 god's divinity instantly shattered. All the mirror light in the surroundings disappeared at the same time. Gunan and the other two returned to the holy tomb of the undead. Gunan looked at the corpse on the ground and smiled in satisfaction. Let's call a day. Wait. Sylvia hurriedly ran over when she saw that he was about to leave. She complained. This is Norris we're talking about. Are you sure that he died just like that? You might not believe me. Gunan glanced at his crime value that had increased by 2,500 points. I'm sure. Chapter 327. Genius in a second. Live in Dichilwan. Oh, Champagne. Mound. The city's F. The journey to the holy undead tomb seemed uneventful. In fact, ever since Gunan arrived in the world of gods, his journey had been orderly. Mansion? F. He was too familiar with this place, so familiar that even if there were any accidents, he could easily turn the situation around with his experience and, of course, his power. Therefore, Gunan did not feel much about Norris' death, and soon left the holy undead tomb, as usual. On the other hand, Sylvia had always been brooding over Norris' death. She could not accept that Norris, who had caused such a ruckus, had died so quietly. In a sense, Sylvia did not look like a god who had lived for tens of thousands of years, but more like an ordinary adventurer with decent strength. There was a reason for this characteristic. Compared to the astral lords of the heavenly worlds, who had gradually broken away from the category of humans since the Break Realm, the gods here were clearly more human. Due to the difference in the laws of space, the legendary realm here, which was equivalent to the Break Realm, did not have the ability to break through the barriers of space and naturally could not develop an attitude of superiority. The legendary masters who still lived in the mortal world still had to face the birth, aging, illness, and death of their family and friends. They still had to endure the distance of space. So how could they be superior? That was why the gods here had the term divinity. In the heavenly worlds, all the astral lords had long accepted the gap between themselves and mortals. They had reached this height step by step from the Break Realm, but it was not to live with mortals. When Gunan and the other two stepped out of the holy undead tomb, the onlookers outside had almost all dispersed. The reason was simple. Two men in red robes were standing at the entrance of the holy undead tomb, respectfully waiting for the people inside to come out. As soon as the three of them appeared, the two men in red robes immediately came up to them and bowed in a strange manner. Esteemed Highness Sylvia, on behalf of our Lord, we extend our most sincere. Before the two could finish, they could not continue because they realized that the one walking in front of the three was not the shadow goddess they had expected, but a youth they did not know. Mishra's oracle. The young man looked up at the two of them, then looked at the symbol on their chests, and asked in confusion, "You don't even know how to greet me?" Mishra was the god of the Minotaurs, one of the gods under the beast god. These two were obviously his messengers. The faces of the two men instantly flushed red. When an oracle represented a god to greet another god, greetings were naturally of utmost importance. When the two of them heard that Sylvia was here, they hurried over to greet her, but they didn't expect to bump into Gunan. Who are you? Why are you calling my lord's name directly? One of the god envoys came to his senses and immediately glared at Gunan. Compared to greetings, directly calling a god by his name was naturally a greater sin. It was normal for the oracle to think of this to change the topic. Gunan didn't even bother to look at the two of them as he continued to walk forward. As for the oracle in front of him, he grabbed his hair with one hand and threw him to the side. Not even his shadow could be seen. The other oracle stared blankly at this scene and then watched helplessly as the three of them walked past him. The two oracles were just a small interlude. Gunan's journey was not affected at all, and he soon returned to Bloody City. At this stage, Gunan's goal in the world of gods had basically been achieved. His sin value had reached 5,000 points, and in the process of recruiting the blood breeds, Cain's left hand also came in handy. There was also a pleasant surprise. Zhong Dai, a native of the heavenly plains, was used by him to walk the path of a player, creating a player-type NPC that originally couldn't exist. In the following days, with Gunan's full help, Shauna quickly ascended to the position of patriarch of the Raymond clan, and then stirred up a true bloodbath in Bloody City. Under Shauna's leadership, the Raymond clan suddenly became extremely aggressive, practically incorporating the entire bloody city into their sphere of influence, invading all other forces. This action allowed the Raymond clan to obtain a large amount of resources at the beginning, but it also caused public anger. Many blood breeds died in the war, and the glory of the Raymond clan could no longer be maintained. However, the blood breeds were a race that abided by the rules. Even in such a situation, Shauna still maintained her considerable ruling power. Of course, this was also thanks to the ancestral scepter in her hands. If not for the existence of this divine weapon, with the vampires' impudence during this period of time, they would have long been annihilated. The chaos in Bloody City only lasted for half a month, and before the God of Steel could react, Gunan had Shauna reveal her final trump card. All clansmen, prepare to move. Shauna sat at the head of the round table, looking down at the people below. Her expression was solemn and calm. With the power of the ancestral scepter, Shauna's strength was considered extraordinary among legends, enough to suppress her clansmen. Move to where? The group of vampires revealed looks of astonishment. For a race that received the protection of the gods, the migration of a group was no small matter. Of course, to the Lord's divine kingdom. Shauna revealed a smile and stood up, while Gunan slowly walked out from behind her. The migration of the Raymond clan was going much smoother than expected. This race that lived in the kingdom of the undead had no faith to speak of, and even lacked too much loyalty to the gods. Shauna only used one sentence to convince most of them. Stay here and be annihilated by the furious enemies, or follow me and enjoy the blessing of the ancestral scepter. Gunan and the others were originally people of the world of gods, so they would not encounter any obstacles if they wanted to leave the world of God's dimensional wall and re-enter the world of gods. But the group of vampires was different. They were natives of the world of gods, so it was not too difficult to leave, but if they wanted to enter the world of gods, they would also need to pass through the dimensional wall. Passing through the dimensional wall required a space-time crystal core, and if it was a small group, they could still sneak in. But if the Raymond clan wanted to enter this place, there were close to 200 people, so it was a little troublesome. In fact, Gunan and the others were now in the gap between the two worlds, looking at the crystal dimensional wall speechlessly. Gunan had not considered this at first. Although he was an expert player, he was not the kind of demon who would calculate every possible possibility. Things that were not very important would always be overlooked. Do you know where to get a space-time crystal core? Gunan asked the young girl, no return, who was beside him. Right now, the only person he could discuss with was no return. Of course, Sylvia cannot follow him here, but little Jean Dai did, but she probably did not even know what a space-time crystal core was. Chapter 328. 1 Second Genius? Live in? Dicho Baluin? Champagne? Mound? City F *CK. It's hard to do it on such a large scale. Mansion? Ka. F. Kawugue said in a hesitant tone. Personally, sending so many people into the heavens is equivalent to openly provoking the 13 heavens. The dignity of the 13 heavens could not be blasphemed. Gunan could privately not give Lu Wen any face, since not many people knew about it. However, if he were to send 200 people into the all heavens, then the 13 heavens would most likely send people to hunt him down. If they didn't do this, it wouldn't be long before the ban would become a useless piece of paper, and the 13 heavens would lose all face. Gunan fell silent. He was unscrupulous, but he was not stupid. Even if they wanted to kill monsters, there was no reason for a level 30 player to kill a level 70 monster. If you're a newbie who has nothing better to do than wander around a high-level monster area, don't blame the monsters for insta-killing you. Gunan didn't know what considerations the 13 heavens had for restricting the flow of goods between the two realms, but he couldn't beat them, so he couldn't force his way through. He thought about it and said, if it really doesn't work, we can only leave the people in the gap and send a group of people back every once in a while. The 13 heavens treated stowaways as if they couldn't see them. Otherwise, there wouldn't be an organization like the Heavenly Deity Society. Wait a minute, the Heaven God Assembly. Gunan's eyes lit up. He suddenly remembered that he had already joined the Heavenly Deity Society. Why not try it out on someone from the Heavenly Deity Society? They must have done more traveling between the two worlds. Perhaps they had experience transporting a large number of people. It just so happened that he needed to make a trip to extreme sword heaven after returning to the myriad heavens to report to Shui Run, one of the people in charge of the Celestial Gods Association. Do you know about extreme sword heaven and Shui Ren's situation? Gunan turned to look at Girl No Return and asked. As one of the top heaven grade planes, extreme sword heaven situation and changes were naturally known by the outside world. However, this information would definitely not involve the Star Lord Shui Ren himself. Information about the Star Lords of the various astral realms was top secret and rarely made public. People only knew him as Shui Ren. He was a swordsman and a very powerful one at that. More information could only be obtained by people of the same level as No Return. Shui Ren is very young, a few generations younger than me. Girl No Return frowned as she pondered. She and Shui Ren could barely be considered as contemporaries, but that was her memory from 9,000 lifetimes ago, so it was not easy to search for it. He's not a typical swordsman, although he's a little obsessed with martial arts. He's more like a scholar. Scholar. Gunan raised his eyebrows. The mighty extreme Sword Heaven Star Lord, one of the strongest swordsmen in the entire universe, was not worthy of being called a scholar. Young Girl No Return's expression was also somewhat strange. I don't understand his sword Tao, and no one understood it back then. Others focus on the unity of essence, chi, and spirit when they draw their swords, but he never does. Then what is he particular about? I don't know either, but I remember the name of the first sword manual he wrote after becoming a Star Lord very clearly, The Sword's Ripples. When Gunan returned to the heavenly worlds, nothing seemed to have changed. The situation was still peaceful, but there were undercurrents surging. Every faction was moving towards their goals, and Gunan's God Nation was no exception. The work in the Bone World was progressing smoothly. The new White Mist had the protection of the Star Lord and its own extraordinary fighting strength, so it was very popular everywhere. There were even a few agents with great potential here. If Gunan opened up a new God Nation, the God Nation would still be in order. The interior of the God Kingdom was still in order. A group of oracles continued to accumulate funds at a stable speed, and there were some changes in the management of the God Kingdom. Lan Si and Yin Xiao Xiao, after understanding the system of the Bone World and learning a few rounds, began to try to integrate it into the God Nation. Gunan was aware of this and had no intention of objecting. Even in the game, when the butler's rank in the God Nation was high, he would definitely make similar requests. What the players needed to do was to enjoy the results they brought. Among the conditions for Gunan to advance to rank 7, his sin value had already met. He only needed to slowly accumulate points to advance to rank 7. However, accumulating points also required efficiency. Having only one dungeon was obviously the least efficient method. Opening a second crescent world was secondary. If he wanted to continue increasing his efficiency, he would have to start a God Nation war. This method could earn both sin value and points, but the threshold was higher. He would have to wait until the God Servant Station was upgraded or even built a few more before it was time to start a God Nation war. The Crescent World isn't easy. If I can make full use of the production capacity, I might be able to support some small-scale wars. Gunan calculated in his mind, trying to find the most efficient way to level up. He quickly made a decision. He would first go to Extreme Sword Heaven and see if there was a way to bring the Blood Breeds in at once. If that was not possible, he would at least bring the legendary Blood Breeds in and let them start clearing the dungeon first. Extreme Sword Heaven. As one of the top 20 large planes in the heavens, one could imagine how prosperous the Extreme Sword Heaven was. What surprised Gunan was that this plane, which was famous for its swords, did not have an antique wuxia style. It was a pure modern city. A modern city with swordsmanship as the highest pursuit. It's quite interesting. Gunan made such an evaluation. A girl walking in front of Gunan smiled and said, "A lot of people say that." Gunan was on the way to visit Shui Ren. The girl was his temporary guide. Just like all the big planes, Extreme Sword Sky had a very strict monitoring of every Break World elite that came to the plane. Not only would they try to find out why they came, but they would also not let them out of their sight. After all, for an astral world that was ruled peacefully, the destructive power of a break-world elite was too strong. "We are here, Master." The girl took Gu Nan to a building near the sea. "This is where Mr. Hongya lives." Gu Nan nodded and did not say anything. He walked forward. He was there to visit Shui Run, but he was the astral master of extreme sword heaven. He could not be seen just because you wanted to. For visitors like Gu Nan, extreme sword heaven's way of dealing with them was to find a representative to verify the visitor's identity and purpose. Then they would decide who to send. The person Gu Nan wanted to see was called Chu Hongya. According to seniority, he was Shui Ren's nephew. He was in charge of receiving visitors like Gu Nan. When Gu Nan entered the building near the sea, there were already 4 or 5 cultivators sitting inside. There were men and women, and there was even a boy with a buzz cut. Seeing Gu Nan come in, a young man approached him with a standard smile. "Mr. Hongya is taking a nap. Please wait here." He sounded very polite, but he looked very calm. Clearly, he had received many guests like Gu Nan before. He did not really care. "Is she upstairs?" Gu Nan raised his eyebrows. The young man was shocked. He realized what he wanted to do. This was not the first time he had seen a guest like this. He coldly laughed and said, "Where Mr. Hongya is not something we know." He said "we," yet his gaze was fixated on Gu Nan, and his actual meaning was obviously, to his surprise, the other party didn't show any anger on his face. He just nodded and waved his hand lightly. The shadow started to spread, and the building started to break. Chapter 329. Genius 1 second. Live. Dichio Baoyuan. Champagne. Mongdang. City F*CK. In a small building near the sea, a shadow appeared under Gu Nan's feet. If the shadow touched someone or something, it would turn them into dust. The young man in front of Gu Nan was the first to be hit. The shadow swept through him. His whole body was like glass that was broken. There was no trace of him left. The young man disappeared along with the floor under everyone's feet. The walls, sofas, coffee tables, and other things around them disappeared. Fortunately, the speed of the shadow's spread was not so fast that people could not react. 5 other visitors quickly stood up and retreated. These people were not ordinary people. They all had break-world power. Some people tried to use their own rules to block it. Before the rules could leave their bodies, they were crushed by the shadow. That scary result scared the people so much that they did not dare stay. They immediately ran away. They did not even care about visiting. The people who came there were not all there for Shui Ren. Most of them were there to see the higher-ups of the sword faction. They were not in a hurry. On the other hand, they wanted to see what would happen to Gu Nan, who dared to cause trouble in Extreme Sword Sky. Under Gu Nan's shadow, more than half of the pavilion was corroded in the blink of an eye. A few of the beams on the first floor were damaged. It caused the second floor to collapse. Miss Chu Hongya, who was rumored to be taking a nap, could not continue sleeping. "How dare you come to Extreme Sword Sky to cause trouble? You must be tired of living." A voice came from above Gu Nan's head. There was a sword light. Mansion? Could they were clearly in a modernized city, but Chu Hongya's words carried the aura of the Jianghu. Gu Nan found it strange. His first reaction was, the NPC's words are so different from the scene. The copywriter's salary is going to be cut. Then he shook his head. He threw away all thoughts of complaining and looked at the sword light. According to the information provided by No Return, Shui Ren was probably a physicist disguised as a swordsman. Chu Hongya, as his disciple's nephew, should be similar. Scientific cultivation had never happened in the game in his previous life, so Gu Nan was quite interested in it. Chu Hongya's sword light was indeed strange. It was a straight thrust, but in Gu Nan's perception, it felt like a cluster of swords. That's right, it felt as if the sword had split up and turned into a cloud of mist that surged toward the person. Is this the sword's wave-like nature? Gu Nan couldn't help but smile faintly. Look, the so-called wave nature of Liji heaven was at least at the level of matter waves and not the peaks and troughs of junior high school physics. It was not that low in terms of pretentiousness. The next moment, the sword light was caught by Gu Nan. The confident Chu Hongye smile froze on his face. Her wave-like sword had achieved a small success, and her power was at the break world level. Even the top break world elites would have to be careful to block that sword, but this person was able to catch it with his hands? If a swordsman was asked what kind of opponent they hated the most, speed, power, and a high level would be the lowest. The answer would be that the opponent could not break the defense. Gunan was one of those opponents. It wasn't just Chu Hongye. Even an opponent of the same level as Gu Nan would have a hard time breaking his defense. Evil God was a pure fighting system, and its evil god body was too strong. Gunan looked at the long sword in his hand. He noticed it was no different from an ordinary sword. A sword that was not moving could not move. After looking at it for a while, Gunan couldn't see anything. He didn't want to observe it anymore. No matter if it was his previous life or this life, Gunan was not a genius. He only knew how to play games. "I'm looking for Shuirun." Gunan walked in front of Chu Hongye and coldly said, "I am looking for Shuirun." When he calmed himself down and took a closer look, he realized that Chu Hongye's getup was very interesting. Her hair was dyed red, and she had an earring in her right ear. She looked like a delinquent girl. She was wearing a very neat robe. There was a wooden scabbard on her back. Her attire did not match her temperament. The delinquent girl in the robe did not look scared. She looked interested. She looked at Gunan and asked, "Why are you looking for my teacher?" Things about the Sky God Society should not be told to outsiders. Gunan was too lazy to make up an excuse, so he said, "I cannot tell you." Chu Hongye was speechless. She thought about it and said, "What is your name?" "I am taking you to see teacher." "I need to tell you my name. Just tell me where he is," Gunan coldly said. "I will go find him myself." He thought it was too troublesome to report back and forth. Even when planet lords visited each other, they rarely had to be reported. This was because once a planet lord's location was known, the local planet lord would soon be alerted. Chu Hongye had never seen a visitor like Gunan. She was not afraid of anything, so she immediately turned her head. "You want me to lead the way? Beg me." Crack! The delinquent girl felt pain in her leg. A scalp-numbing sound was heard. Gunan had broken her leg bone with a stomp. "Where is Shuirun?" Gunan did not even bother to speak. Why you? Kill him if you can." "Oh no, wait." Chu Hongye was in so much pain that she stuttered, but she changed her words quickly. Gunan slowly retracted his shadow. If Chu Hongye had refused, he would not have minded refining her into a shadow servant first and asking her questions later. However, since she was willing to lead the way, Gunan did not have to go through this step. For players, they would save time. If they could just hang up, clicking the mouse would be a waste of energy. "Lead the way." Chu Hongye struggled to stand up. Ignoring the injury on her leg, she smiled strangely and said, "Hee, come with me." As she said this, she waved her hand lightly, and a message was transmitted through the rune in her hand. Outside the Sword Faction's mountain gate, a young man and a woman in Taoist robes were looking ahead. "Junior Sister Chu is in Wudong District. If she's bringing someone over, she should be here by now. Why isn't she here yet?" The man's voice was slightly anxious. "Why are you so anxious?" his female companion said angrily. Junior Sister said that person could take her wave sword with his bare hands, so he's probably a planet lord. "We have to leave as soon as possible." The man smiled bitterly. "I can't control the sword beasts anymore. I should have asked Master for help." The woman was already going crazy. She poked his head and said, "Use your brain. Would Master let us out if you asked for him? Would he avenge Junior Sister Chu?" "Hey, don't touch me." The man's body tilted from her movement. He immediately panicked, and the rune on his hand disappeared. He felt a chill in his heart. He subconsciously looked behind him and saw a giant ape almost 10 people tall, roaring and charging forward. It's over. Chapter 330. Genius in 1 second. Live in Di Chilwan. Champagne. Langdun. City done. Astral lords were completely independent. Apart from the 13 skies, it was almost impossible to see an astral lord relying on another astral realm. In other words, even in a large dimension like extreme sword heaven, the only astral lord who truly belonged here was Shuirun. The other astral lords were at most guests or living in seclusion. They might even be seeking revenge, but they had no affiliation with extreme sword heaven. Only at the level of the 13 skies, where the astral lord was one with the great Tao, and the astral realm had a fundamental breakthrough, would they have the foundation to recruit other astral lords. Precisely because of this, a group of astral lords below the 13 skies used all kinds of methods to try to create artificial astral lord level combat power. Extreme Sword Heaven was a very typical example. Schwerin's cultivation was more like research. Therefore, in the process of his research, he came up with some strange methods that could be used to create combat power. After all, technology was the #1 productive force, and the production of combat power was also production. Gao Xiaowen's face was pale. His heart turned cold as he looked at the combat power that was flying away. Leaving the sect with a sword beast was not a light crime. It would be fine if it could be solved perfectly, but if things got out of hand, he would be punished. But now he had let an astral lord sword beast go out of control. Gao Xiaowen did not know how to explain this to the sect. He felt that he might even be expelled from the sect. Seeing the giant ape howling away, the girl next to him, Wang Xiu, also froze. She recalled the terrifying consequences of a sword beast going out of control and was momentarily speechless. What do we do? Wang Xiu's voice was trembling. Quick, go back to Master. In the dense forest, Gu Yunan held Chu Hongye's neck with one hand and walked forward slowly. Ever since he approached the sword sect, Gunan did not let Chu Hongye out of his control. Physics, sword Dao, was something he had never come into contact with before. No one knew what kind of strange abilities it had. If Chu Hongye successfully entered the spatial tunnel because of a moment of carelessness, it would be difficult to find her again. Laws might be cut off, and abilities might be restricted, but the body of the heretic god was unstoppable. Gunan believed that if he wanted to, even Schwerin would not be able to stop him from twisting Chu Hongye's neck. Hey, can you put me down? Chu Hongye did not have the same thoughts as Gunan. She said angrily. Why? I can walk by myself, she said, kicking the leg that was still intact. Gunan glanced at her and unhurriedly placed her on the ground. Then he stepped on her good leg. Crack! The sound of bones cracking rang out again. Chu Hongye immediately cried out in pain. What are you doing? Gunan glanced at her coldly. Can you still leave now? I can't. Chu Hongye really wanted to draw her sword and slash the fellow in front of her, but the heavy reality made her choose to surrender. Just you wait. Chu Hongye glared at Gunan fiercely, but in his heart, he was wondering why his senior brothers and sisters weren't here yet. Right at this moment, a loud roar came from in front of the two of them. It was a giant ape howling at the sky, wantonly destroying everything in its surroundings. Chu Hongye's face paled. Of course, she knew that under normal circumstances, a sword beast would never do something like that. The sword beast had clearly lost control. A level 5 god servant? Not bad. Gunan merely glanced over and said casually, God servants are different from God's envoys and God citizens in a God kingdom. Their responsibility was to conquer other planes. If one were to use the concept of business games as an analogy, God's citizens were the people, God's envoys were the various heroes, and God's servants were the soldiers. Different types of heroes occupied different fields, different levels, and different types of soldiers, but they all played the same role: war. God's servants were usually man-made beings. Most of them were not even living beings. They were relatively rare. After transmigrating for so long, this was the first time Gunan saw a God servant. Get out of the way! Get out of the way! Behind the giant ape, an old Taoist with a grizzled beard hurried over. Seeing Gunan and Chu Hongye blocking their way, he quickly shouted, Let go of me! Chu Hongye was still in Gunan's hand, but she could not help but scream this time. Chu Hongye knew very well how terrifying the sword ape's power was. This was the result of her Uncle Master's experiments on wild beasts based on the traditional path of sword cultivators. As it turned out, wild beasts could cultivate the sword too, and apes were the best of the best. This sword ape's power was enough to go against a newly promoted Star Lord. However, What made her feel helpless was that Gu Nin did not move at all. He watched as the sword ape charged over and slashed its palm down. The slash was as fast as lightning. It used its palm as a sword, and the sword intent did not disperse. This move alone was enough to prove that the sword Tao of the giant ape was extraordinary. She wondered what the cultivators who focused on cultivating the sword would think if they saw this. Humans were inferior to apes. Gunan stood in front of the sword ape and raised his left hand. He caught the sword ape's palm firmly. It did not even tremble. Instead, a strong gust of wind was generated, almost sending Chu Hongye flying. The sword ape's palm was as small as Gunan's, but Gunan caught it casually. The two figures, one big and one small, confronted each other. It was a strange scene. The other people in the forest also fell silent. Instead, the giant ape roared again, trying to break free with all its might. Gunan's hand did not move at all. Then he swung the sword ape to the side. He swung the sword ape like a ball and smashed it onto the ground. Accompanied by a loud sound, the sword ape's head hit the ground and let out a sad cry. The sword ape's true power was focused on sword techniques, but it was not very powerful. Therefore, the terrifying force made it faint. Did it die from the fall? Gao Xiaowen looked at the motionless sword ape on the ground and said, "How can it die so easily? It's a sword beast." Wang Qiu said forcefully, but his tone was obviously not confident. "It's not dead, but it's almost there." Their master, the white-bearded old Taoist, sighed. "Drag the sword beast back first. There's no need for that. Leave it to me." A gentle voice rang in their ears. Only then did they realize that a figure had appeared beside them. It was a young man in light green Taoist robes. The old Taoist bowed as soon as he saw him. "Senior brother sect master. Uncle master. Uncle master, save me." Chu Hongye, who was beside Gunan, immediately shouted. The person who came this time was the person Gu Nan wanted to visit. He was the #1 sword saint, supreme sword heaven star lord, Xuerun. Gunan had caused such a huge commotion here. If Xuerun still couldn't detect it, then he wouldn't deserve to be the Star Lord. Xuerun bowed to the old Taoist. Then he stepped in front of Gunan and Chu Hongye. He smiled warmly. "Your Excellency Gunan, I wanted to meet you for a long time." As he said that, he patted Chu Hongye's head lightly, signaling her to keep quiet. "Why do you want to meet me?" Gunan asked. "To test my sword." Xuerun's voice was still as gentle as jade, but there was a hint of fanaticism on his face. "I heard that your body is invincible. If you can block my sword, I can agree to one of your requests." Swordsmen were usually obsessed with martial arts, and Xuerun was no exception. However, Xuerun was a very special swordsman. He paid special attention to etiquette, or rather, the correct procedure. Before he received Gunan's reply, he had no intention of making the first move. It was Gunan's first time meeting such a polite person. He nodded. "Sure." As he said that, he lifted Chu Hongye in front of him, putting her between him and Xuerun. Chapter 331. 1 Second Genius. Live in Dichio Baoyuan. Champagne. Mound. City F***CK. The forest fell into silence again. Chu Hongye was held in front of Gunan. A faint killing intent came from behind her. She could only look at Xuerun with tears in her eyes. She dared not move. The old Taoist priest and the others looked at Gunan speechlessly. They had already realized that the person in front of them was probably a Star Lord. However, this was the first time they had seen such a shameless Star Lord. Xuerun could not help but laugh. The sword aura that had gathered in front of him slowly dissipated. A moment later, Gunan and Xuerun sat opposite each other. The place where the two of them met was very special. It was a 3-story building with a unique style. It was completely made of bamboo, and the ground was covered with a thin layer of mat. It was a little like the Japanese style that Gunan remembered. Xuerun even got into a kneeling position. Even Chu Hongye, who was serving at the side, did the same. "Where did you learn this from?" Gunan looked at the two of them curiously. He had never heard of a Japanese swordsman sect in the myriad heavens. "You mean this?" Xuerun pointed to the surroundings and said, It was left behind by my master. It's the residence of a swordsman friend. His sword principle is very interesting. Gunan nodded and didn't ask any more questions. He started to talk about his intentions. Bring 200 people into the all heavens. Schwerin rubbed his chin. Lingyang told me that you came back from there, but it's impossible to sneak in with so many people. The 13 heavens are not blind. Schwerin was one of the Heavenly God Society's higher-ups. Whether it was his strength or his qualifications, he was more than qualified for this position. Therefore, after Gunan joined the Celestial God Association, Taoist Master Spirit Yang quickly sent the news back. Schwerin naturally knew about this matter. The control of the 13 heavens over the various heavens wasn't omnipresent, but it definitely wasn't weak. They could ignore the relatively small scale of illegal immigration, but that was the extent of it. What about in batches? Gunan could easily think of this problem. The difficulty isn't small either. Schwerin laughed. Many of the smugglers are actually people from the 13 heavens. If you do it too many times, you'll be found out sooner or later. Gunan could not help but frown slightly. He didn't think that the 13 heavens would actually do something like eating both the black and the white. As expected, a power of that level wouldn't leave behind too many flaws. Seeing his expression, Schwerin continued, "But it's actually easier for you to bring people here than to smuggle them out. Have you ever considered using official channels?" "You mean bring people in through 13 days? Gunan raised his eyebrows. He was used to doing things alone and had never thought about this. "That's right." Schwerin smiled and said, "If you don't mind being noticed by the 13 heavens, I can help you with this. Going through the channels of the 13 heavens to bring people in naturally had great benefits. There was no need to hide, and it was stable and efficient. The downside was that the people who were brought in had to be investigated. Their identities, origins, and whereabouts would all be recorded by the 13 heavens." Gunan thought about it and decided to agree. After all, Shana and her group of vampires had nothing to hide. Once they entered the 13 heavens, they would be brought into the God Nation without anyone noticing. Sure. Thus, Gunan nodded. Then it's a deal. Schwerin did not have the air of a grand astrolord at all. He was approachable like an ordinary person. "Also, I hope that you could do me a small favor." Gunan was very familiar with the method of obtaining rewards for completing missions. Naturally, he had no objections. "Fight." "No." Schwerin smiled and patted Chu Hongya's head. Under the latter's resentful gaze, he said slowly, "Help me look after my child." Chu Hongya was Schwerin's martial niece, but her master had passed away a long time ago. In reality, she was brought up by Schwerin. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were master and disciple, or even father and daughter. More importantly, Schwerin only had a few disciples. Among them, Chu Hongya had the most hope of inheriting his mantle. Such a Chu Hongya status in the sword sect was imaginable. But it was also such a Chu Hongya who was now following closely behind Gunan, sizing up Gunan's back with a wary gaze. Schwerin's condition for agreeing to help was that he wanted Gunan to look after his child for a period of time. That child was Chu Hongya. The time limit was roughly 3 months to half a year. When Schwerin returned, Gunan only had a hand over a living Chu Hongya. Minor injuries were nothing to a cultivator of this level, just like Chu Hongya's broken legs, which were quickly healed. "What does Schwerin want me to bring you? Will someone come to kill you?" Gunan turned to ask Chu Hongya. To him, this was nothing more than a protection mission. Predicting possible danger was naturally what the players had to do. Gunan did not mind staying in the extreme sword heaven for a period of time. After taking over the blood race, he would have to go into hibernation for a period of time and wait for his accumulated points. Even if he planned to start a war in the Divine Kingdom, the initial investment of points was not a small number. Staying in the extreme sword heaven to look after the child did not mean that he would not have time to return to the Divine Kingdom. It would not affect his arrangements there. Chu Hongya looked at Gunan and said somewhat embarrassedly, "I'm not in any danger. It's just that I tend to get into danger." Grotto Void Heaven. The Grotto Void Heaven was a superplane among the 13 heavens. Not only was it powerful, but it was also one of the earliest astral realms to enter this level. It was a true veteran among the astral realms. In the distant ancient times, the grotto void heaven was once known as the Tao sect. The current profound, pure world of Taoist spirit yang was actually one of the branches of the ancient Tao sect. The grotto void heaven had been passed down for many generations. What was surprising was that every generation Star Lord was a scholar who successfully entered the Tao integration realm. The grotto void heaven had never fallen out of the ranks of the 13 heavens. Of course, it might not have been called the 13 heavens back then. The current Star Lord of the grotto void heaven was a rare female. She was called Taoist Priestess Yulian in the mortal world because her real name was Yulian. At this moment, Yulian was sitting opposite Schwerin. They were chatting happily. In that case, I'll leave this matter to you. Schwerin smiled and took a sip of tea. The tea leaves were specially made by the Tao sect, and an indescribable fragrance lingered in the air. Yulian's appearance was ordinary. She was neither beautiful nor ugly, but her facial features were very regular. She gave off the feeling that she was very serious. "It's a small matter," she replied to Schwerin's request with these two words. It was indeed a small matter to bring a group of people into the 9 heavens. As long as the other party was willing to be investigated, the 13 heavens actually did not have to pay any price. A few space-time crystal cores were really nothing to the 13 heavens who had the resources of the 9 heavens. The one who wants to bring people in is Gunan, right? Is this person worth roping him in like this? Yulian naturally knew who Schwerin was speaking for. He's a very interesting person. Schwerin smiled. His gaze suddenly became somewhat deep. He should be related to that side. Chapter 332. Genius in 1 second. Live. Dichilwan. Oh. Champagne. Mound. City F *CK. Yulian obviously wouldn't misunderstand what Schwerin meant by there, so she frowned slightly. This Gunan's power is indeed unprecedented, but it's even more different from there. Yulian thought about it and shook her head. As one of the 13 heaven star lords, Yulian was no stranger to the gods. She had even personally fought with the Lord of the other side. If the power system of the heavenly world could be described as having 100 flowers blooming, then the world of gods could be said to be completely single. Putting aside the differences in the godhoods, it could be said that all the gods walked the same path, which was to use the power of faith as the foundation and use the godhood to drive their power. Yulian didn't really agree that Gunan was related to the other side, but she still kept an eye on him. After all, it was Schwerin who said it. Schwerin was one of the top Star Lords in the world, and he was only 1 step away from the 13 heavens and could take that step at any time. Just their personal friendship was enough for Yulian to pay attention to him. "If there's a chance, pull him over to our side," she said. "I will. Let's wait and see." Schwerin was still smiling, and he changed the topic. "The little friend that Lewin found is going to the Earth ruins soon. Aren't you going to make some preparations? I'll be going out soon, so I might not be able to help you." "There's no need for that," Yulian said decisively, her gaze cold. Yulian said decisively, her gaze somewhat cold. Lewin's hand has stretched too far. The 13 heavens moved faster than Gunan expected. In less than 2 days, someone had already gone to extradite the vampires. Shauna and the others naturally didn't care about the investigation, but Zhong Dai, who had a slightly questionable identity. She was originally from the heavenly worlds and wasn't affected by the bit wall at all. There was no need to investigate her. The blood breeds were sent to the God Kingdom by Gunan, and a separate territory was given to them to develop. Shauna led 2 legendary blood breeds to begin the Crescent World Instance Dungeon. Only Zhong Dai was decisively thrown into the Bone World by Gunan, and she wasn't given a chance to enter the God Kingdom. She was Zhong Qinghe's daughter, after all. Who knew if Zhong Qinghe had left any tricks on her? Letting her enter the Divine Kingdom would be risky. If she wanted to enter the Divine Kingdom, she had to at least wait until Gunan felt that the Divine Kingdom was strong enough, or until he killed Zhong Qinghe. As for the Raymond clan, who had lived in the Undead Kingdom for many years, they weren't used to the environment in Gunan's Divine Kingdom, but they were still very satisfied. There weren't too many powerful forces here, and most of the resources were still in a state of development. It was very suitable for them to survive. Apart from the difference in culture and customs, as well as the fact that legendary powerhouses would be dragged to do hard labor, there was nothing else that he was dissatisfied with. After settling the Divine Nation, Gunan supervised the progress of the Crescent World Instance dungeon while his true body remained in extreme sword heaven. He soon learned what Chu Hongya meant by getting into danger. Senior Gunan, someone's here again, and it's still because of Junior Sister Chu. Gao Xiaowen had a bitter expression on his face as he ran to Gunan's side and reported. In just half a month, this was the 4th time he had come to ask for help. If possible, Gao Xiaowen would never want to do this. He knew how terrifying this person in front of him was, or rather brutal. Chu Hongya was really a troublemaker. She was born with a mocking face, and no matter where she went, she would attract hatred. Every few days, people would come to ask for an explanation. "Oh, can't you get rid of them this time?" Gunan asked unhurriedly as he leisurely basked in the sun and covered his head with a book. Gunan didn't even have the intention to show up the previous 3 times they came to him. He had the sword sect send them away. It was nothing more than an apology and compensation. It wasn't the first time the sword sect had cleaned up Chu Hongya's mess. "Yes, Junior Sister Chu killed someone this time," Gao Xiaowen said helplessly. "And it was the wife of a Constellation Lord. Now that Constellation Lord is here." The Constellation Lord came from a small plane. Even the astral realm had just been established, so he wasn't very powerful. But he was a Constellation Lord after all, and extreme sword heaven couldn't be unreasonable. The bigger the plane, the more they had to care about their reputation. It was not good to bully others openly. "Senior, you should put Junior Sister Chu in confinement," Gao Xiaowen couldn't help but say. "If you don't care about her, she's too good at causing trouble." That's what the previous seniors did in the end. Clearly, this wasn't the first time Chu Hongya had been stored. Whenever Xuerun had to go out, someone had to look after Chu Hongya. However, Gunan revealed an interested smile and said, "Come, let's go take a look." Gao Xiaowen quickly brought Gu Nan to the main hall. Chu Hongya was here, and so were a few of the sword sect's upper echelons. There was also a burly man with a face full of stubble. "This is Lord Xiaodiyu." Gao Xiaowen pointed at the burly man and introduced him to Gu Nan. Xiaodiyu sized up Gu Nan coldly. He wasn't in the mood to greet him. His expression remained cold. He was here to collect a debt, not to make friends. "Lord Gunan, you've come at the right time. Help us persuade Mr. Qiao," an old man in Taoist robes said with a bitter smile. He was Gao Xiaowen's master, an old Taoist named Zhang Hui. There was a female Taoist beside him. She was also a cultivator of his generation. Her name was Wu Yun, and she was also one of Chu Hongya's martial uncles. Wu Yun was busy cleaning up Chu Hongya's mess. She didn't know Gunan, so she naturally had no time to bother with him. However, no matter how she persuaded or promised compensation, Xiaodiyu's expression remained cold. He said coldly, "I don't need compensation. You can't compensate for my wife's life." As he spoke, he turned to Chu Hongya and said, "I only have one question. My wife has no grudge against your extreme sword heaven. Why did you kill her?" The few of them turned to look at Chu Hongya. The latter merely pouted and scoffed. "Her breasts were bigger than mine. I hate women with big breasts the most, so I killed her." Everyone was stunned when they heard that. Xiaodiyu's eyes were bloodshot. He activated the laws around him in a frenzy and directed his will at Chu Hongya. "You're courting death." In the next moment, a hand waved in front of Chu Hongya, instantly extinguishing all of his power of laws. It was Gunan who stood in front of Chu Hongya. Xiaodiyu was a star lord with an astral world after all. He shouldn't have been so weak. However, he was only here as a clone. Xiaodiyu was no fool. He knew that extreme sword heaven was powerful and they already had a feud, yet he still came here to seek his own death. Looking at Gunan's expressionless face, Xiaodiyu was so furious that he laughed. "Good, very good. What a lawless and tyrannical extreme sword heaven." After saying that, his figure turned into a wisp of green smoke and disappeared. Xiaodiyu's disappearance left Gao Xiaowen and the rest looking worried. It was obvious that the other party wouldn't give up on revenge. This meant that junior sister Chu would have to face the threat of a Star Lord whenever she went out in the future. Not bad. Gunan smiled and patted Chu Hongye's head. His action was the same as Shuiren's. Shuiren said that you have the highest chance of becoming a Star Lord. Indeed. Why do you say that? Gao Xiaowen was dumbfounded. He couldn't understand why junior sister Chu, who was always making trouble for no reason, wanted to become a Star Lord. In a sense, this was a complete disregard for human life. Gunan looked at Chu Hongye with a faint smile. It was as if he was looking at a rookie with great potential in the game in his past life. Chu Hongye wasn't stupid, and it was impossible that this was the first time Xiao Diyu had asked her the reason for killing people. She had said those words deliberately in front of Gunan. Her goal was probably to cause trouble for Gunan. No matter what, the fact that she could kill innocent people for her own goals was one of the hallmarks of a Star Lord. In a world of gods, this was called divinity. A clear goal and clear logic, very good, Gunan said to Chu Hongye with a smile. But you have to deal with the trouble you caused yourself. Chu Hongye panicked slightly and asked subconsciously, how do I deal with it? Destroy Xiao Diyu's astral world. Chapter 333. Genius in 1 second. Residence? Diqiuan? Champagne? Mound? City F *CK? Gunan admired Chu Hongye very much. This kind of appreciation was similar to discovering a card that wasn't very strong but had very special attributes while playing a card game. It would be even more perfect if you happened to have a powerful card that could complement it. Gunan saw some of Zhong Dai's shadow in Chu Hongye. No, in fact, she surpassed Zhong Dai in terms of compatibility with players. Zhong Dai was merely an experimental candidate for Gunan. It was only because she was suitable to become a member of the Blood Clan that he placed the Blood Clan line on her. Gunan did not even do the preliminary work beforehand to ensure that Zhong Dai would be under his complete control. However, with Zhong Dai's experience, Gunan already had other ideas. He wanted to make use of all the player lines in the Pantheon world and build a player army for himself. In a god kingdom, divine citizens and divine servants could be produced, but oracles could only be recruited from outside. Divine servants might be able to surpass level 5 in strength, but their intellect would never reach that level, not to mention maxim. Only oracles possessed complete intellect. They could learn and evolve on their own, and could even be strengthened through the god's embassy. In that case, what else was more suitable than players to be oracles? If I could really control an army of players, it would be too easy to fight a national war. Gunan sat in his room and thought as he watched Chu Hongye write furiously. A national war was the abbreviation for a war between players and a god kingdom. It was also one of the main ways to play between the first and second transition. Prior to this, the construction and management of a god kingdom were essentially in service of a god kingdom war. And what Chu Hongye was currently doing was the same thing. The plan is done. Chu Hongye looked impatient as she passed a thin piece of paper to Gunan. There were a few lines of words written on it. When translated, the general meaning of these lines could be summarized in one sentence. Everyone, follow me. Do you plan to take this to the Windy World? Gunan placed the paper on the table and asked Chu Hongye. The Great Wind World was Xiao Diyu's astral plane. It was originally a plane that developed naturally. It had just been under Xiao Diyu's control for a few decades and could be considered a new astral plane. Is there a problem? Chu Hongye asked with a glare. Gunan shook his head. Big Wind World was just starting out. There were only 1 or 2 break world people inside. Using brute force was not a problem. However, the reason why Gunan asked Chu Hongye to write the proposal was not because he wanted her to make plans. Instead, he wanted to analyze her abilities, attributes, and personality. To players, any NPC could be raided and subdued. Gunan intended to let Chu Hongye join his army of players. Of course, he had to examine her ability values in all aspects. It would be convenient if he took her in as an oracle. He could see her directly in the oracle hall. But because of the same concerns as Zhong Dai, Gunan would not let her enter the god kingdom just yet. Gunan even began to think that if most of the talents came from the big plains, he should set up an organization in the god kingdom to put these people there. Since they were going to fight in the other worlds, these heroes would mostly need to lead soldiers. It did not matter if they entered the God Kingdom or not. Chu Hongye saw that Gu Nin did not say anything, so she spoke with an uncertain tone. Then, I'm leaving. She was very active, and she was always interested in exciting things like this. When Xuerun was around, she would not have had such an opportunity. Gu Nin waved his hand to signal for her to leave. He wanted to see how much Chu Hongye could do when she was free to do what she wanted. Her personality was suitable for joining the army of players, but she was different from the experimental Zhong Dai. If her abilities were too bad, she would still be abandoned by Gu Nin. In fact, with Chu Hongye as an example, Gu Nin's thinking had already expanded. If it was difficult to find someone like that, he could train them himself. Gu Nin looked at Chu Hongye's back as she left and thought, let's try it out. There is nothing else to do here. Chu Hongye was gathering people. She was going to wipe out Big Wind World. During that time, Gu Nin's God Kingdom had a new change. There were two reasons for the change. One was that Redtail, who was in charge of the White Mist in the White Bone world, had been strengthened by the God Embassy. After many years of accumulation, he had finally reached Break World level. Gu Nin might be able to kill Star Lords casually now, but the difficulty of leveling up wouldn't change. The world were not places that could be leveled up by popping pills. If one person achieved success, even dogs and chickens would not be able to do so easily. On the other hand, Shana and the other Blood's progress in conquering the Crescent world was faster than Gu Nin expected. After a fight, it was guaranteed that the silver-robed elder would not be able to escape before there were casualties. After restricting the silver-robed elder's ability to run away, what was left was just grinding. If the three workers were familiar with the fighting style, taking them down would not be a problem. At the end of the day, the silver-robed elder only inherited a portion of Gu Nin's power and his sharp fighting instincts. In reality, Gu Nin's greatest strength was his familiarity with different systems of power and the specific tactics he could use. The silver-robed elder did not have this memory, so he would be killed sooner or later. No matter what, Gu Nin was very concerned about this. He even gathered up 3 other legendary blood kindred. He asked them to use the experience of Shana and the others to fight the Crescent world in 2 shifts. If the Crescent world was conquered, the speed at which Gu Nin accumulated points would increase. The money for the God Kingdom War would depend on it. That day, Gu Nin was still in Extreme Sword Sky, but he was looking at the other side of the sky. That was where Big Wind World was. Chu Hongye's attack on Big Wind World had already begun. Although the plane invasion she organized seemed to Gu Nin to have no technical content, no killing efficiency, and even no sense of beauty, it was still an invasion. Countless Extreme Sword Sky cultivators came to Big Wind World. They were led by a few Break World elites. They tried their best to kill the local elites of Big Wind World. Gu Nin, who was watching from the side, nodded. Chu Hongye's strategy was crude, but the Extreme Sword Sky cultivators were not bad. They did a good job of killing and blocking people. Well, it was not their first time doing this. On the other hand, it showed how weak Big Wind World was. There was no need for world breakers to do anything. The invasion was not met with any resistance. Simply put, Big Wind World civilization was still a feudal farming civilization. Xiao Diyu did not have time to improve it. Forget cultivators of a higher level than them. Even if they were fighting against cultivators of the same level, the natives of the Great Wind World would still be forced to retreat. 2 of Big Wind World's world breakers tried to fight, but they were easily killed by Chu Hongye. Then the entire Big Wind World was burned. Chapter 334. Genius in a Second? Residence? Dichuan? Champagne? Mound? City F? The fall of the Great Wind World was faster and smoother than expected. Mansion? F. Gu Nin did not get a chance to make a move. Instead, he noticed something different as he observed from the sidelines. It was obvious that this was not the first time the people of Extreme Sword Heaven had invaded other planes. There was no doubt about that. Therefore, the tactics they had come up with to deal with the invasion could be used as a reference. In this regard, there was a considerable difference between the heavenly worlds and the world of gods. The people of the heavenly worlds were particular about capturing bandits, capturing the ringleader. They would attack the cultivators of the target plane and destroy the enemy's strength as quickly as possible. The world of gods was different. The first to be killed was the oracles, followed by the fanatics. The source of this difference was still in one word: faith. The gods obtained power through their god nations, and it was the faith of the people of the god nation. The celestial lords were more like Gunan. They only needed power. Therefore, the god nation wars would inevitably make strategic adjustments based on this point. After all, the ultimate goal of the god nation wars was to kill the celestial lords or the gods themselves. Attacking the planes was only to weaken their power. After observing and understanding the difference between the two god nation wars, Gunan was quite satisfied. What made him less satisfied was that Xiao Diyu did not show up. If there were no accidents during the entire plane invasion, then Xiao Diyu's absence could be considered the biggest accident. He didn't show up. What do we do? Chu Hongye returned to Gunan as if she had just gone out for a stroll. The entire invasion lasted less than a week. It was no different from a vacation. Gunan was silent for a while, then asked Gao Xiaowen, "Have you found out where Xiao Diyu went?" "Not yet. Our people are working on it." Gao Xiaowen wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and answered quickly. It was strange that Xiao Diyu did not show up. After all, no matter how one looked at it, there was no reason for him to hide. The destruction of the star boundary meant that his power would be greatly restricted, and he would return to the level of an ordinary star lord overnight. In terms of chances, Chu Hongye had even used himself as bait in the end, but he still failed to lure Xiao Diyu out. If Xiao Diyu had the slightest chance of killing Chu Hongye now, his chance would be even slimmer when Xueren returned. So what exactly was Xiao Diyu trying to do? Got it. The old Taoist priest, Zhang Hui, walked in from the door and said to them, "Someone found Xiao Diyu's tracks in the ruins of Earth." So it's in the ruins of Earth. Gao Xiaowen was the first to come to a realization. No wonder he didn't come back, even when his astral boundary was destroyed. He can't get out at all. There are many strange places in the universe. Some are naturally formed, while others were special zones caused by changes in ancient times. The Earth ruins belong to the latter. It was a relic of the ancient hollow heaven. The grotto void sky was one of the 13 skies. Moreover, it was a rather legendary plane. Mansion? The grotto void sky had a very long history. It was one of the largest planes in the universe during ancient times. Moreover, it had always been in the 13 skies and had never left that level. However, it was not always smooth sailing. The grotto void sky had experienced several major changes. During one of them, even a part of the astral boundary shattered and fell outside the grotto void sky. That was how the ruins of Earth were formed today. Many people knew where the ruins of Earth were. However, it was mysterious and unpredictable. Even people from the grotto void sky did not dare to explore it recklessly. They did not expect Xiao Diyu to appear in the grotto void sky this time. Did he go involuntarily? Gunan raised his eyebrows. It was strange that Xiao Diyu still had the mood to search for treasures in the face of a mortal enemy. It was really strange. No, Zhang Hui said. There were no signs of him appearing at the entrance of the ruins of Earth. He might have been pulled indirectly. As he spoke, Zhang Hui explained to them about the special mechanism of the ruins of Earth. The ruins of Earth was a very special place. The spatial laws inside were different from those outside. They formed a unique set of rules. According to folklore, the ruins of Earth were a place where one could never leave after entering. However, this was not quite accurate. The ruins of Earth did not restrict anyone from entering or leaving. If you were interested in going in for a stroll or two every day, you could still return home on time for dinner. The special thing about the ruins of Earth was that many things inside would leave imprints on cultivators. These imprints would also be triggered irregularly. Once the imprint was triggered, the cultivator would immediately be sent back to the ruins of Earth. At this time, it was not so easy for cultivators to come out. They had to resolve the matter that triggered the imprint. Otherwise, they would be trapped inside forever. Even Xiao Diyu, who was at the Star Lord level, could not avoid this kind of rule that sent people back. It was indeed terrifying. Interesting. After understanding this set of rules, Gunan could not help but smile. However, as he continued to read, he unexpectedly found a familiar name in the information. Lu Wenying, the young man that Luwen thought highly of. The person who triggered the imprint and pulled Xiaodiyu back to the ruins of Earth was Lu Wenying. Gunan narrowed his eyes. He did not believe that this was a coincidence. If it was not a coincidence, then who had the ability to arrange all of this? Chu Hongye did not know much about the ruins of Earth, and the only person who could make her find Xiaodiyu accidentally was probably Xuerun. Gunan recalled that when Xuerun entrusted Chu Hongye to him, there was no unusual smile on his face. Then, he put the information aside. Since Xiaodiyu is in the ruins of Earth, let's wait for him to return, said Gunan casually as he looked at the distant sky. It shouldn't be too long. As expected, not long after the destruction of the Windy World, a piece of news was suddenly published in various newspapers, causing a heated discussion in all the worlds. The great changes in the ruins of Earth and the appearance of the inheritance of the ancient cave Void Heaven had already led to the deaths of 6 Star Lords. Now, the inheritance of the ancient cave Void Heaven had fallen into the hands of a person called Lu Wenying. Lu Wenying, it's Lu Wenying again. Countless similar exclamations sounded in all the worlds, including the previous time arena. This was the second time Lu Wenying's name was placed in front of the tables of the major forces. While everyone was sighing with emotion, Lu Wenying himself was accompanying his 2 companions to the mountain gate of the supreme Sword Heaven Sword sect. Lu Wenying was a little different from what Gunan had seen previously. Previously, he looked a little young and inexperienced, but now he had a mature and steady temperament. Dressed in a light green Taoist robe, he looked extraordinary. His 2 companions were also not ordinary people. One of them had a pair of wings on his back, a pair of strange horns on his head, and an unruly expression on his face. The other was a plain-clothed girl with a long sword hanging on her back and a corpse in her arms. It was Xiaodiyu. Who are you? The disciple guarding the mountain gate of the sword sect asked them in a deep voice. No matter how he looked at it, these 3 people did not look like guests. The girl's expression was cold. She gently placed Xiaodiyu's corpse on the ground and drew her long sword from her back. Senior Xiao died for my son, so I will bear his hatred. As soon as she finished speaking, a sword wound instantly appeared on the neck of the disciple guarding the mountain gate, and his body fell limply to the ground. The girl stepped forward and walked up the mountain step by step. Lu Wenying looked at the disciple with a somewhat unbearable expression, but he could only sigh helplessly in the end. As for the arrogant man with wings on his back, he shouted at the crowd that had gathered, "All of you, listen up. Our big sister, Yin Xing, is destined to become the #1 swordsman in all heavens." Chapter 335. Genius in 1 second. Live. Dicho Baoyuan. Champagne. Lang Duan. City Duan. Xuerun had not returned yet, but the person who wanted to become the #1 swordsman in the sky had arrived first. In this world, there were many people who wanted to achieve that goal, but not many had the ability to do so. Chu Hongye, Gao Xiaowen, and Zhang Hui were sitting on the mountain peak. They watched Yin Xing walk forward, 1 sword at a time, 1 person at a time. Their faces did not look too good. Yin Xing was the most traditional swordsman. Every move he made was filled with Jianghu air. He was no different from a normal warrior. Since Xuerun came to the swordmaster, because of his unique sword skills, his understanding of the sword skills was biased. Chu Hongye, who was his inheritor, was not interested in the traditional sword skills. Her face looked as if she did not care. "Stop," Zhang Hui said. He stopped Chu Hongye, who was about to go down the mountain. "Where are you going?" Chu Hongye turned around and said, "I'm going to teach her a lesson." Zhang Hui pulled her behind him and told Gao Xiaowen, "Go find another sword ape." Gao Xiaowen hurriedly agreed and quickly ran down. The sword master had the ability to raise sword apes, but they would not just raise one. With Zhang Hui there, they were not afraid the sword apes would go out of control. On the other hand, Chu Hongye could only pout. Zhang Hui was her uncle, too. She could not go against his wishes. As for Gunan, he was more like Chu Hongya's babysitter. Xueren did not entrust the entire sword master to him. What Yin Qing was doing now was provoking the entire sword master. In terms of power, Yin Qing was a top world breaker. So, Zhang Hui did not say a word. He sent out a Star Lord class Sword Ape. The Sword Ape did not have a rule. It did not have a higher life level, but its power was Star Lord class. Even if it lost to an ordinary Star Lord, it was enough to deal with a world breaker. However, contrary to Zhang Hui's expectations, the Sword Ape was defeated. Moreover, it was a complete defeat. There was no suspense in its defeat. It was not because the girl had skipped levels to challenge it, but because she was the Star Lord. The Star Lord Sword Ape was no different from the disciples of the Sword Sect earlier. It was beheaded by Yin Qing without any trouble. TSK, as expected of the big sister. The Winged Man and Lu Weining followed behind. When they saw this scene, they could not help but laugh. I'm afraid the two of us can't beat this gorilla. Lu Weining nodded silently. Different from a normal Star Lord, the Sword Ape's power was almost completely exposed, and Lu Weining and the other two could easily determine its strength. It was precisely because of this that Lu Weining believed that if he didn't use some of his trump cards, it would be very difficult to deal with him. On the mountaintop, Zhang Hui and the others did not look too good. Chu Hongya pursed her lips and did not bring up the topic of showing off anymore. She was confident in her sword skills, but she could not ignore the difference between a Break World class and a Star Lord. A Star Lord meant that the rules were complete and self-contained. Before she could do that, she did not have the ability to challenge him. Xueren's sword skills happened to be the most difficult step to take. It meant the establishment of a whole new worldview. Even Chu Hongya, who had been influenced by this since she was young, could not do it easily. Let me do it. Gunan's voice rang in their ears. Zhang Hui's expression changed slightly, but he shook his head firmly. There's no need to trouble, mister. We have to take back the sword sects face ourselves. Xueren had been operating in extreme sword sky for tens of thousands of years, so he had more than one or two tricks up his sleeve. Otherwise, if he was not there, any Star Lord could bully them. Extreme sword sky would be in chaos. Zhang Hui's gaze was fixed on Yin Qing below. The latter was already standing on the mountainside. If she took one more step forward, Gunan smiled and said, I'm afraid it's too late. As soon as he said that, the expressions of Zhang Hui and the others changed at the same time. That was because a faintly discernible sword mind was already in front of them. Yin Qing was still standing where she was. She did not take that fatal step, but the sword mind was right in front of her. Chu Hongya, the will that was completely formed by sword mind, conveyed this message clearly, as if there was really a person standing in front of her. Chu Hongya's face was slightly pale. She had never included sword mind in her education. She could not imagine that something like sword mind could also transmit will. However, Gunan took a step forward at this moment and stood in front of Chu Hongya. He instantly cut off all the sword mind. To others, the sword mind was extremely mysterious, but in Gunan's eyes, it was as clear as a lamp. However, at this moment, he was secretly shaking his head. He was not satisfied with Chu Hongya's performance. Xueren had used the method of cultivating scientists to cultivate successors, causing Chu Hongya's ability to be flawed. Perhaps time could be used to make up for it, but Gunan did not have that time. In comparison, Gunan hoped to use probability to select divine messengers. Out of 100 people, one would definitely stand out. If 100 were not enough, then 1,000, 10,000. In this world, human life was the most worthless thing. With that in mind, Gunan no longer cared about Chu Hongya. He shifted his gaze to the foot of the mountain, and his gaze became even colder. He did not want to waste any more time here. Lu Weining and the Winged Man, Yin Yang, hurried to Yin Qing's side. The latter said coldly, "Don't go forward." Before Lu Weining could move, Yin Yang had already taken a step back with a whoosh. His movement was so big that it seemed exaggerated. Oomph. I knew this sword sect wasn't a good place. How despicable and shameless. Yin Yang said quickly. The speed of his words made Lu Weining feel that he was perhaps even faster than his sword. Yin Qing, however, was not in the mood to joke. He said in a deep voice, "It's very dangerous. Go back, both of you." Lu Wenying and Yin Yang were stunned when they heard this. Even with Yin Yang's personality, he was shocked that this would come from Big Sister's mouth. The next moment, Yin Qing unsheathed his sword. The soaring sword mind was almost about to split the sun, the moon, and the stars. However, it was only a fist that descended from the sky. A soundless bang was heard. Lu Wenying and Yin Yang felt their hearts sink as if something was pressing down on them. They could not breathe. Yin Qing's full-powered sword pierced through the fist. It went through the wrist, the bones, and only came out from the shoulder. But even so, a small portion of that terrifying force still remained. Yin Qing's sword-wielding right hand exploded. Blood spurted from her mouth. In front of her, Gu Nan's figure was standing there quietly. He had a sword in his right hand. It looked comical, but no one could laugh now. That was because Gu Nan had casually raised his left hand and pulled the sword out of his hand. Then, he threw it on the ground. Chapter 336. Genius in 1 second. Dolly? Di Chilwan? Oh? Champagne? Lang Di? City Fu? Yin Qing's sword Dao was very strong. This kind of expert who focused on one Dao was more self-consistent than other Star Lords. Therefore, even among the Star Lords, Yin Qing was considered an expert, unless he met a Star Lord with an astral boundary. Unfortunately, Gu Nan's ability was to completely subdue all artistic conception and idealism. As long as absolute strength couldn't destroy the heretic god's body, Gu Nan was equivalent to an undying existence. He wasn't afraid of continuous attacks because no one could catch up to him. Gu Nan. Lu Wenying naturally recognized the other party at a glance, and the anger in his eyes was almost spewing out. He and Gu Nan could be considered to have a deep relationship. Back when they went to solitary destructive heaven together, he still treated the other party as a teammate. Later, when they were going to the time arena, he even wanted to invite Gu Nan along. Even though they had been rejected back then, their relationship did not deteriorate until Gu Nan killed Luo Zhe and severely injured Lu Wenying. Then he snatched the Sanitime. In Lu Wenying's eyes, Gu Nan had already become a bandit, an enemy who had a deep grudge against him. In Gu Nan's words, his favorable impression of him was already in the negatives. Lu Wenying didn't expect to see Gu Nan again in extreme Sword Heaven Sword Sect. He also didn't expect that even Yin Qing couldn't stop the other party. Big Sister. Yin Yang's expression changed drastically. He rushed up to support Yin Qing and stared fiercely at Gu Nan. Yin Yang's character was indeed very bad, but his friendship with Yin Qing for so many years wasn't fake. Lu Wenying said, "Gu Nan, if you have any methods, just come at me. These two have nothing to do with this." After saying this, Lu Wenying rushed forward without thinking, took out a small box, and threw it out. A layer of fine powder began to float in the air. "Hurry up and leave." This was what Lu Wenying said to the two behind him. Yin Yang didn't have time to think. He waved his hand to open a spatial passage and rushed in while supporting Yin Qing. "You will all die." However, Gu Nan only sneered and stepped into the powder. His figure was not hindered at all. Yin Qing was only injured, but he hadn't lost consciousness. Seeing this scene, he immediately stopped in his tracks and wanted to turn around to help. Yin Yang hurriedly dragged her back and said, "Big Sister, what are you doing? That kid Lu Wenying is blessed and has a long life. Ordinary people won't be able to hurt him." It wasn't the first day they met Lu Wenying, and they knew that he was blessed with great fortune. They didn't know who stood behind him, but he wouldn't be killed so easily. Of course, Lu Wenying himself didn't know this. He smiled bitterly and watched as Gu Nan's fist descended. "Brother Yin, Big Sister Yin, it looks like I'll have to take my leave first." Lu Wenying thought helplessly. However, at this moment, a white light suddenly flashed in front of his chest. 9 light spots floated in the air and formed a strange array. High up in the sky, Lu Wen sat on a chair, and a woman in Taoist robes stood in front of him. This person was the Paradise Heaven Star Lord, Yu Lian, and the place where the two of them were was Lu Wen's Shijitian. "Your man took my lineage's inheritance. Lu Wen, you've reached too far." Yu Lian looked coldly at Lu Wen, her tone not at all polite. She was much more experienced than Lu Wan, and she wasn't weak either. Naturally, there was no need for her to be polite. However, Lu Wan only smiled and said, Lu Weining is only a friend of mine. How can he be my man? Yulian obviously wouldn't argue with him here. She smiled coldly and said, Fine, I hope you can still say this when I kill him. This matter concerned the inheritance of the Paradise Heaven. Even with Yulian's status, she didn't care about bullying the weak. In reality, at the level of the 13 heavens, it was more about whether they felt it was worth it and not what others thought. If anyone was dissatisfied, they could just kill them. However, Lu Wan's expression didn't change. He shook his head slightly and said, Ordinary people probably won't be able to touch him. Xueren is also busy recently, right? The relationship between Xueren and Yu Lian wasn't a secret. But now that Lu Wan mentioned him, it was obvious that he was the one who found the matter that Xueren was busy with. Yu Lian was silent for a while. Suddenly, a smile appeared on her expressionless face. Xueren has held the title of Sword Saint for so many years. I'm afraid you've all forgotten that when he was young, he was famous for his meticulous planning. After saying this, Yu Lian's figure disappeared from Shi Jitian and returned to the Paradise Heaven, where she and Xueren had conversed. Of course, Xueren was no longer here, but the note he left behind was still there. 9 stars appear. Capture Lu Weining and obtain the inheritance. Junior Brother Su, please make a trip to this matter. Yu Lian's voice echoed in the Paradise Heaven. Yes. In the extreme sword heaven, 9 spots of light shone brightly in front of Lu Weining. They actually formed a strange formation pattern and blocked in front of Gunan. And as the formation was formed, the true appearance of these 9 spots of light was also revealed. They were clearly 9 small people with different appearances. There were men, women, young and old, and they all had one thing in common. They were all Star-Lords. There were a total of 9 Star-Lords. Among these 9 figures, Gunan saw the already dead Xiao Diyu and the Mountain River Realm Star-Lord, Yishan Zun. Although he didn't recognize the others, it wasn't difficult to determine that these 9 people were probably people who had come into contact with Lu Weining. The 9 figures all had in different expressions. They arranged themselves in a formation of 5 in front and 4 behind, protecting Lu Weining. Behind them, Yin Yang couldn't help but exclaim, Impressive! So the 9 stars protection that old man was talking about really referred to the 9 Star-Lords. After seeing this, Yin Yang wasn't in a hurry to escape with Yin Qing. As expected, Lu Weining didn't disappoint him. He summoned 9 Star-Lords at once. Where couldn't he go in this world? What he didn't notice was that a man in a black Taoist robe was already standing in the shadows, staring coldly at Lu Weining. As long as Lu Weining took a step back and left the protection of the 9 stars, he would probably be captured in one fell swoop. Among the 9 stars, the leader was Yishan Zun, this Star-Lord whose peak strength was already close to realm grade. In his illusory state, he already didn't recognize Gunan, but he still had Yishan Zun's strength and personality. 9 stars protection. Yishan Zun shouted coldly. His fists carried the terrifying power of mountains and rivers as he directly punched at Gunan. Almost at the same time as him, the other 8 Star-Lords didn't stay idle either. They used their best moves from the start. Gunan's eyes were cold as he watched Yishan Zun descend with unparalleled momentum. He suddenly raised his leg and kicked the other's abdomen. Back then, he had used a rank 4 Saint physique and rank 6 nomological laws to block Yishan Zun until he couldn't do anything. Now that Gunnan's main body had descended, and the power of the heretic god's physique was even above the nomological laws, what did Yishan Zun have to contend with it? Yishan Zun, who was descending like Mount Tai, flew back at an even faster speed in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, Gunnan's figure flickered, and he directly bypassed the other 8 Star-Lords and pounced toward Lu Weining. Lu Weining hurriedly retreated in shock. Thus, the black-robed Taoist figure appeared behind him and grabbed him. A cold laugh came from his mouth. You're quite daring to snatch my grotto void heaven's inheritance. Come with me. He knocked Lu Weining out with a palm strike. Then, he looked at Gunnan with a smile. Thank you for your help today, Taoist friend. In the future, Grotto Void Heaven will definitely repay you generously. Bastard. Chapter 337. Genius in 1 second. Live in Dicho 1. Oh. The kid that Lu Wen had his eyes on is dead. Lu Wenying? Yes. When Shui Run returned to the Grotto Void Heaven, this was the first news he received. This sword saint, who Yu Lian had called flawless foresight, had miscalculated this time. It happened in his extreme sword heaven. Shui Run didn't spend much effort to understand what had happened there. Gunan? How interesting. After Shui Run understood the whole story, he couldn't help but laugh. Lu Wen has really suffered a huge loss this time. He had originally thought that by letting Gunan force out Lu Wenying's trump card, Yu Lian's people could take the chance to take Lu Wenying down and obtain the inheritance of the ancient Grotto Void Heaven. Yu Lian obviously couldn't personally make a move. People at their level were too huge. Their every move couldn't be hidden from other experts of the same level. The moment Yu Lian was about to make a move, Lu Wen would definitely be able to stop her immediately. The result was hard to say, but once things developed to that stage, the level of repercussions would be different. Now that Lu Wenying had died in the hands of Gunan, Yu Lian had lost the inheritance she wanted. However, she didn't really care. There was more than one inheritance in the ruins of Earth. It didn't matter if it was gone. Moreover, after so many years, wasn't the Grotto Void Heaven still one of the 13 skies? The things of the ancient seniors might not be good. The key was that it couldn't land in the hands of outsiders. This was a matter of face and the confidentiality of his sect's core techniques. More importantly, just as Shui Run had said, Lu Wenying's death was a huge loss for Lu Wen. Lu Wen has prepared quite a lot of things for that kid over the years. A rare smile appeared on Yu Lian's indifferent face. A 1 in 3 chance. How is he so sure that Lu Wenying is that person's son? At Yu Lian's level, she obviously understood why Lu Wen thought highly of Lu Wenying, but didn't want to personally interact with him. It was also because of this that Lu Wenying's death was truly dead. Lu Wen wasn't an Earth immortal yet, to be able to casually revive a person he had never come into contact with. Back then, when Lu Wen was promoted, she was still alive. It's not impossible for her to know some inside information, Shui Run said. Furthermore, the other two are a little too unreliable. Yu Lian didn't mind. In any case, even if that person could really come back to life and return from the River of Time, he would only be slightly stronger than her. She wouldn't be afraid of him. At the level of the 13 heavens, it would not be easy for them to die. Even if it was an expert of the same level, it would be extremely difficult to kill them. Keep an eye on that Gunan, Yu Lian said to Shui Run. Don't let anyone kill him. I'll keep an eye on Lu Wen. Lu Wen suddenly made a move against the Earth ruins and coveted the ancient Hollow Heaven's inheritance. This was simply slapping the entire Hollow Heaven's face. Now that the plan had been ruined by Gunan, Yu Lian was naturally more than happy to keep Gunan around. From time to time, she would discuss Lu Wen. All right, Shui Run nodded. His eyes flickered, and no one knew what he was thinking. Sure, Jitian. Lu Wen sat alone on a high spot, his expression unreadable. However, from the fact that he was alone, it was enough to tell that there was a problem. Even when he was talking to Yu Lian, a huge dragon was standing on his shoulder. Now Long Long was sitting obediently below him. Is the problem very serious? Long Long looked at Lu Wen's expression, then looked at Duan Wenshi beside him, and couldn't help but ask. Duan Wenshi was one of the representatives of the Astral Realm Gate. He was also a great Astral Lord, and was even Lu Wen's good friend. Many things regarding Lu Wenying were actually orchestrated by him. Therefore, when something happened to Lu Wenying, he was the first to detect it. Then, he rushed over at the first moment. It's very serious. Duan Wenshi revealed a bitter smile, and said to Long Long, it's not as simple as the problem. It's already a disaster. The problem could be solved, but the disaster could not. One could only endure it. Duan Wenshi was all too clear on how much preparation Lu Wen had made for Lu Wenying, and how many years his plans had been going on. It was only like this that he could deceive the other people of the 13 heavens, and bring Lu Wenying under his control. Only when the time to break out of this predicament was approaching did he reveal everything to the public. But because of a single Goon Nan, all of this had been destroyed. Lu Wenying was dead. Even if he came back to life, the true spirit imprint that they had not come into contact with could not possibly be the original one. When that woman returned, would she still acknowledge him as her son? Thinking of this, Duan Wenqi couldn't help but say, Gunan killed her son. When she returns, even Yu Yin won't be able to protect him. But his voice reverberated in the great hall. Lu Wen did not reply, while Long looked at them curiously. Long did not understand what they were saying. Perhaps she had enough information, but she had never been willing to waste the effort to analyze it. Duan Wenqi saw that Lu Wen wasn't speaking and thought that he couldn't bear the anger in his heart. He stood up and said, "We can't find that Gu Nan, so we'll first deal with his people in the bone world." Only now did Lu Wen's eyes gradually regain focus, and he said in a slow voice, "There's no need." Duan Wenqi also heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing that he was finally willing to speak. But he still felt that it was unfair for his old friend, and there was a hint of anger in his voice. Are we just going to let that Gu Nan continue like this? Of course not. A peculiar light appeared in Lu Wen's eyes. Not only can we not touch Gu Nan now, but we also have to protect him. We definitely can't let him die. And why is that? Duan Wenqi was truly shocked this time. He killed Lu Wenying, so he bears this karma, Lu Wen said in an unhurried manner. Lu Wen said unhurriedly, when she returns, this Gu Nan might have an even better effect. Setting aside the two Dao integration stage Star Lords of the 13 Heavens who had begun to protect Gu Nan himself, who had killed Lu Wenying, immediately snuck back to his divine kingdom. He could disregard the 13 Heavens. In any case, as long as he didn't cause a commotion, no one would know which plane he was in. But after killing someone right in front of their eyes, if he still stayed where he was to die, then he would basically be an idiot. As for Chu Hongye, after Gunan determined that her potential was insufficient, she had already entered the list of people to be abandoned. Unlike experimental breeds like Zhong Dai, when building a real player army, Gunan had to be very strict in his selection, and even their backgrounds had to be screened. This was because it was naturally the most convenient for the members of the player army to become Gu Nan's god envoys. Regardless of whether it was the Time Arena or the God's Embassy, they could all greatly enhance their power. After resolving the matter of the extreme sword heaven, not long after Gu Nan returned to his divine kingdom, a piece of good news arrived. The two groups of Blood Tribe members who had formed teams to clear the Crescent Moon Realm had completed the Crescent Moon Realm dungeon on the same day. Gunan finally had a second stable source of points. Chapter 338. Genius 1 second. Live. Dicho 1. Champagne. Mound. City F *CK. The points in the Crescent world would be much higher than in the Splendid world. Gunan had already expected this. After all, the Crescent world was a Tier 4 dungeon, and its difficulty was much higher than the Splendid world. It was almost at the peak of dungeons. However, when the results were placed in front of Gunan, he was still surprised. The income from a single run in the Crescent world was 10 times higher than that of the Splendid world. Now that the Divine Kingdom had reached Tier 6 and the Evil God's Temple had risen to Level 1, he needed 6 Level 1 buildings and a miracle construction to continue upgrading. The 6 Level 1 buildings were relatively simple. The Level 0 buildings previously built could be upgraded, and he could spend 20,000 points to upgrade them to Level 1. The miracle construction was slightly more troublesome. The Divine Kingdom War was inevitable. Previously, Gunan had spent several months building the 6 Level 0 buildings. Now he could upgrade a Level 1 building in about 3 days. Even if he wanted to build a new Level 1 building, it would take him 5 days at most. Only this amount of points was enough to support the expenses of a Divine Kingdom War. The second dungeon was enough for the logistics to meet the standard, which made Gunan more excited. In the game, there were sometimes people who could not fight a war after building almost 10 dungeons. Thus, the rich and imposing Gu Nan waved his hand and sent all 6 blood breeds who had contributed greatly to the Time Arena. A large sum of points was spent on them to help them improve their strength. As for the Tier 3 agents who were farming the splendid world, Gunan did not ignore them because of this. Mansion? A? F? Who, after all, things like dungeons were not purely a test of strength. The Crescent world was just a special case. If there were new high-difficulty dungeons in the future, they might still have to work on them. After dealing with the matters of his subordinates, Gunan's gaze quickly fell on the God's Servant building. The God's Servant was the core of the Divine Kingdom War, because the God's Servants were soldiers. To fight a Divine Kingdom War well, choosing the appropriate soldiers and the precise ratio of soldiers was sometimes more important than on-the-spot tactics. In theory, as long as there were enough good soldiers, even a pig could win a war. Gunan oversaw the Divine Kingdom. Those who needed to farm instance dungeons did so, and those who needed to manage the Divine Kingdom were not idle either. Only Gunan had been flipping through some information for several days in a row. The information was sent over by Red Tail from the Bone World, and it was all about some small realms. But even if they were small planes, these planes had a common characteristic. They were all controlled by the Star Lord. An astral realm with a master and a dimension without a master were two completely different things. You could do whatever you wanted in a masterless plane. Even if you made a hole in the sky, no one would care. After all, a world will was just a world will. However, consciousness could not interfere with reality. This was the materialism of socialism. However, it was different for an astral boundary that had a master. If you made a big fuss, the astral master might find trouble with you directly. For the young Star Lords, the life and death of every citizen and cultivator could directly affect their strength. If you kill their people, you will weaken their strength. It is no different from killing your father. But unfortunately, the target of the Divine Kingdom War could only be an astral boundary that had a master. After all, the ultimate goal of the war was to slay the gods. If there were no gods, what was the point of fighting? It was the same in the heavenly worlds. Gunan was now looking for a suitable plane as his next target. As long as he could destroy the target plane and kill the Star Lord, he would be able to obtain a large number of points and sin points from the God Servant. This was the function of the God Servant. It was the core building of the Divine Kingdom War. However, Gunan had not decided what type of God Servant to train. It would depend on the target plane and try to choose a unit that could restrain it. But even after a few days, Gunan had not found a perfect target. There were only a few that he could try. I still don't have enough time. Gunan could not help but shake his head lightly. Under normal circumstances, there were very few players who could start a war so quickly. Many people only had the chance to start their first war when they reached rank 8. The reason was simple. Although there were different types of God Servants, their absolute strength was limited by their level. Gunan could at most build a rank 1 barracks now, so the strength of the soldiers was naturally not that strong. Fortunately, after subduing the Raymond clan, he had a lot of rank 4 subordinates. Otherwise, the Divine Kingdom War would be even more difficult. After all, he could not directly intervene in the game. The Divine Kingdom War was to conquer other planes through the God Servant. The players could only act when it was king against king, or else the benefits would be greatly reduced. Unable to find a suitable plane, Gunan could only let Red Tail continue to choose while he began to prepare for the player army. The core of the idea of the player army was to create a group of people under Gunan's control and full of potential. It would be best if they had the mentality of a player. The last point was more difficult, but the first two were fine. This was like ordinary forces choosing good seedlings. Gunan quickly passed on the request of the God Servants and asked them to find suitable candidates. What Gunan did not expect was that the first to speak was Yin Xiao Xiao. There's a very good seedling in the Divine Kingdom from the Western continent. Yin Xiao Xiao said in a calm tone. Because of Gunan's influence, they were now more and more used to the name Divine Kingdom. Gunan showed some interest and said, "How is he good?" "He is the champion of the most recent Continental Martial Arts tournament. He is 29 years old. Great talents mature slowly." Gunan raised his eyebrows and said, "The power system of the Divine Kingdom in the immortal and demon world was not very high, so the age of reaching the peak of power was often relatively young. Gunan still remembered that in the previous continental martial arts tournaments, not to mention the champion, there were very few people over 25 years old in the top three. Yin Xiao, however, seemed to have a lot of confidence in this person. She revealed a faint smile and said, "Teacher, after you meet him, you will definitely be satisfied." There had never been a lack of talents in this world. When the population expanded to the point where it was calculated in units of worlds, it was even more so. Liang Ruxin stood in front of the gate of the evil god's temple. His not-so-young face was filled with surprise, but more than that, he was calm. He had reason to be calm. In his less than 30 years of life, he had already experienced several ups and downs. Now that he had won the Continental Martial Arts Tournament, it could be said that his life was complete. If there was anything else he wanted to know, it was probably, before Liang Ruxin had time to think, he suddenly felt his vision go black, and his consciousness was instantly taken away. When he woke up again, he was already in a completely different world. "Teacher?" Yin Xiao stood beside Gu Nan and looked at this scene in shock. She saw with her own eyes that Gu Nan did not even meet Liang Ruxin and directly sent him to another plane. If you want to see a person's nature, nothing is more suitable than a completely unfamiliar environment. Gu Nan turned his head and said with a faint smile, "Oh right, start finding people to write some novels and spread them among the Divine Kingdom." "What novels?" "Transmigration novels." Chapter 339. Genius in 1 second. Live in Dichuan. Oh. Champagne. Langdun. City done. Finding people to spread time travel novels in the Holy Kingdom was to spread the concept of time travel. Now, in the Holy Kingdom, the opposition between the Eastern and Western continents had been completely established. The arrangement that Gu Nin had conceived was carried out by Yin Xiao and the others to the letter. The concept of martial arts competition was constantly instilled in the people since they were born and before they could read. Victory in the martial arts competition was the honor given by society to the individual and the collective. In the Holy Kingdom, everyone's goal was to win, and win again. As long as you were strong enough and defeated enough opponents, you could gain social status, cultivation resources, and the power to dominate others. Any other things would be derived from these three. People who grew up in such a society would hardly have time to think about the meaning of their life and who was behind all this. In many people's legends, it was a god who used this method to choose the strongest person in the world. As for why there was such a concept of God in such an Oriental society, it was up to Lan Si. Talents cultivated in such an environment were guaranteed to be loyal to Gu Nan. At least to a large extent, they had no room to refuse. That was why Gu Nin dared to use the method of time travel to test the quality of Liang Ruxin. Moreover, this method might be better. Of course, in order to ensure that the candidate could understand what to do in the first place in such a situation in the future, it was necessary to promote the concept of time travel. The plane that Gu Nan had chosen for Liang Ruxin was not a random one. It was one of the few choices that he had made previously. Jean Linsher. Liang Ruxin stared blankly at the scene in front of him. He was in a forest at the moment. There were birds singing above his head, and there were even figures not far ahead. But he was sure that he was not in the original world. The reason was simple. There were no 3 suns in the Holy Kingdom. 3 suns hung in the sky, and the fierce sunlight sprinkled down. Liang Ruxin felt that he could not open his eyes for a while. At this moment, a cold female voice rang in his ears. Ultimate mission. Become the king of the country within a year. Mission reward. Unknown. Punishment for mission failure. Obliteration. After giving Liang Ruxin the ultimate mission, Gu Nin continued his work with a calm expression. Gu Nin wasn't a real system, and he didn't have time to observe Liang Ruxin's every move. He would only give Liang Ruxin a final goal, and then gradually see the results. The Golden Forest world was an even smaller plane than the Divine Kingdom, and the flow of time was even slower. A year on the other side might only be 2 or 3 months in the Divine Kingdom. Speaking of which, as the evil divine shrine leveled up, Yin Xiao and Lan Si gave Gu Nin more than once feedback that the flow of time in the divine kingdom was accelerating. If the ratio of the origin world to the origin world was 10-1, then now it was 9-1, or even 8-1. This wasn't a bad thing. Perhaps when Gu Nin advanced to the 8th or 9th step, his divine kingdom would enter the level of a world plane and become a primary world. At that time, the divine nation would naturally be exposed. A world-level plane would not be able to hide from everyone's eyes. Of course, at the same time, he would enjoy all the conveniences of the primary world. The most typical thing was that he could be reincarnated directly from the divine kingdom, and there would be no need for the bone world branch. The construction of the divine kingdom is still a long way off. Gu Nin sighed as he looked at the situation in the divine kingdom. After all, this was the core gameplay of the first stage change of the game, and it was also the stage that killed the players the most. Of course, it wouldn't be easy. Invasions were unavoidable. Otherwise, he might not even be able to gather the materials needed for construction, let alone points and sim points. The materials needed for a level 1 construction were not just basic resources. In order to find a suitable plane to invade, Liang Ruxin wasn't the only traveler appointed by Gu Nin. In fact, Gu Nin had selected about 10 planes, and then sent people chosen by Yin Xiao and the others to explore these planes. Of course, Gu Nin didn't have the time to keep an eye on them, but as a big boss, it wasn't a problem for him to order his subordinates to do things. So, the White Mist members in the Bone World were used again. They all became spies, and they regularly reported the situation of these people. There was no other way to deal with this. The planes that Gu Nin had chosen were all overseen by Star Lords. Whether Gu Nin went there himself or sent other world breakers, the local planet masters would immediately notice. Although Gu Nin could kill ordinary planet masters at will, having an astral world and not being on a different level, especially in someone else's territory. Many people thought that planet masters without an astral world were just slightly stronger world breakers, and there was nothing wrong with that. But having an astral world meant that they could easily use the power of the astral world. They had an endless source of power, and their explosiveness would increase. Just like Xiaodiyu. If Gu Nin didn't let Chu Hongye bring people from extreme sword heaven to destroy the Gale world and kill the local cultivators, Xiaodiyu would have been very strong. Even if Gu Nin's god kingdom was stronger than his, and he had more power, that was a fair fight between the two of them. The battlefield could not be in the Gale world. Just like back then, Zuozua, who was at the peak of level 10, went to the astral world to deal with a half-dead red. There was a 2.5 level difference, but she could only suppress him. She couldn't kill him. A planet master's blessing on their own astral world was too great. It was so great that when gods fought, they had to have a god kingdom war first. They couldn't fight directly. Otherwise, if they hid in their own astral world, what could you do? Of course, a planet master could not use the power of his astral world whenever he wanted. Every time he used it, it would cost him a lot. Unless it was a matter of life and death, no one was willing to use it. Because of these reasons, Gu Nin couldn't directly fight a planet master with an astral world. He could only use small tricks. A god kingdom war was never as simple as a bunch of soldiers shouting and rushing. Preliminary investigation, selection of soldiers, undercover infiltration, stirring up internal strife, and even working together from the inside and outside were all things to be expected. From the moment Gu Nin decided to fight, the war had already begun. But just as Gu Nin sent out a bunch of people and waited for news to come back, Redtail sent him a message. "Schwerin wants to see me." After receiving the message, Gu Nin thought about it and did not refuse. He had to hide from the angry Lu Wen for a while. Of course, he couldn't show his real body, but a clone could meet him. Chapter 340. Genius in 1 second. Live in Dichio Baoyuan, Champagne, Langdang, City F*CK. Supreme Sword Heaven. Schwerin was still Schwerin, and Chu Hongye was still Chu Hongye, but Gu Nin had changed his body. He was now dressed in a silver robe, but he had activated his sage body. What an interesting clone. Schwerin could not help but smile as he looked at Gu Nin's sage body. With his knowledge, It was not difficult for him to discern some details about the sage body. Someone said you came from the other side. Looks like it's true. Shui Run, who was familiar with the Pantheon world, could discern more from the sage body. Chu Hongye was not present at the moment. This was the first time the two of them had discussed the Heavenly God Society. Gunan raised an eyebrow. Wu Gui told you. Shuiren shook his head. I know Ansher Buddha, but I'm not familiar with him. Given his status, he would not lie about such a matter. Thus, another person popped up in Gunan's mind. So he's Purple Lightning? As expected, Shuiren smiled. Or rather, his mother, Purple Will, told me about it. Back then, I was able to attain Tao because of Senior Purple Will. Gunan frowned slightly, but he was sorting out the relationship between these Star Lords in his mind. Forget it, their relationship was too complicated, and he could not be bothered to think about it. However, the general timeline was easy to sort out. According to Zhua's relationship, he, Purple Will, and Red were from the same generation. Shuiren and Wansher Buddha were from the same generation, which meant that they were younger than Purple Will and the others. As for exactly how many generations, or tens of thousands of years there was between the two of them, it wasn't something that Gunan paid attention to. What can I do for you? Gunan turned around and asked. Mansion? Question mark? F. They could guess as much as they wanted. No one would be able to guess anyway. Let them guess. No one would be able to guess it anyway. Shuiren's expression became solemn. Since you've already joined the Divine God Association, I must tell you why we established this organization. Gunan also became slightly solemn. He had always been very interested in matters related to the Heavenly Deity Association. To put it simply, the Heavenly Deity Association only has one goal, and that is to reach Tao integration, Shuiren said calmly. In other words, it's to become a main god. Before Gunan could speak, Shuiren continued, You should know that there are many paths that lead to the Grand Tao in this world, but only one person can walk each path. Gunan nodded. Naturally, he knew this. In fact, most of the conflicts between sovereigns stemmed from this. Because of this, the beast deity had been changed many times. It couldn't be helped. Compared to the other gods, the only way for every beast god to ascend to the top was to kill their seniors. The problem of overlapping fundamental laws wasn't something that could be resolved with just a slight deviation. For example, if the wind god wanted to ascend, if there was already an air god among the sovereigns, then the former's ascension would definitely be more difficult. Among the 13 heavens, there's one called the Martial Soldier Heaven. Shuiren's voice became slightly gloomy. The Martial Soldier Heavens Chun online controls all weapons and martial arts in the world. All martial cultivators and weapon cultivators will be affected by him when they attain Tao, including me. Gunan instantly understood what he meant and blurted out, So you want to go to the world of gods to attain Tao? That's right. Shuiren grinned. The war god over there is completely different from us. At least his influence is much smaller than Shinanlai's. Gunan couldn't help but laugh. It had to be said that none of these famous celestial lords were fools. They had long since thoroughly analyzed the differences and advantages between the two worlds, and they still wanted to use this loophole to strengthen themselves. So you're the one who's going to ascend now? Gunan asked, amused. To Gunan, becoming a lord was a big deal, but to Gunan, it was as easy as eating a meal. However, Shuiren didn't mind. He only said, I'm not that fast yet. Someone is going to ascend. You might know this person. Who? Lorenza, Heaven's Sanctum, the frontline plane. This wasn't the first time Gunan had come to Heaven's Sanctum, so he was already familiar with the place. However, this time, he didn't come with his main body, but with a well-hidden clone. The sage's body was completely wrapped in a black robe, and his face was still the same silver mask. If he didn't fight, almost no one would recognize Gunan. This time, Gunan came to welcome Lorenza. Lorenza, the goddess of flowers, was a level 10 super god like Shuiren, and now she was preparing to ascend. This was very unexpected to Gunan. In his dozens of games, there had never been a situation where Lorenza ascended to become a lord. In other words, the existence of the Devata heavens was the reason why Lorenza made this decision. In the Devata heavens, it was very difficult for her to ascend. This was because one of the 12 Lord gods was called the goddess of nature. The goddess of nature was in charge of all living beings in nature. In ancient times, she was also known as the goddess of flowers and leaves, which was in direct conflict with Lorenza's priesthood. Although it wasn't to the extent that she couldn't ascend, it would still make it much more difficult. In comparison, ascending to the Devata heavens was a good choice. However, with Lorenza's power and status, it would not be easy for her to enter the Devata heavens quietly. If she made a move, the Lord gods would immediately notice. Once she entered the Devata heavens, she would also be noticed by the people in the 13 heavens. No one knew if someone in the 13 heavens would leak the news to them. This was a matter of course. If Lorenza ascended to the Tao here, wouldn't that mean that she had stolen the spots from the 13 heavens? It could be said that this matter harmed the collective interests of the Devata heavens. Only the Divine God Society's members would be willing to lead the way. The Divine Kingdom world was a highly modern and technological side realm. Gunan was currently sitting in an exquisitely decorated coffee shop. The drink in front of him was steaming hot, but it had not been touched. If he was dressed in a black robe, he would really look out of place. However, Gunan just sat there calmly until a man in a black suit hurriedly walked in and saw Gunan at a glance. It cannot be helped. His attire was too eye-catching. The man in a black suit's mouth twitched slightly. He forced himself to walk up to Gunan and said in a low voice, "Mr. Gu?" "Yes." Gunan nodded. He uttered a string of numbers and lightly drew a seal with his hand. The man breathed a sigh of relief and nodded lightly. This was the secret signal for both parties. He could only hand over the item when the numbers and seal matched. What Gunan received was a small box wrapped in black cloth. He looked down at it. It was hard to imagine that a 10th stage great god was hiding inside, even if it was only a part of him. "Where are the other two?" Gunan's eyes moved slightly and shifted to the man's face. "They're with my companion. She'll be here soon." "Damn it." Halfway through his sentence, the man suddenly paused because there was a sound coming from his wireless earpiece. Soon after, he looked at Gunan again and said, "I'm very sorry. Something happened to my companion." "Please, you were robbed? Someone knows what you're transporting?" No. The man hurriedly waved his hands. "It should be a habitual robber. Sometimes they don't need to know what the goods are. As long as it's something important, they can always sell it for a good price." Gunan's eyes narrowed. He said coldly, "That makes sense. Take me there." The man immediately looked awkward. He stood up and said, "Sir, the members en route are our company's internal secrets." Gunan raised his head indifferently. His gaze was as if he was looking at a dead man. After a short moment, Gunan walked out of the coffee shop once more, and there was a pitch-black figure leading the way in front of him, whereas the coffee shop was deathly silent, and not a single sound could be heard. Chapter 341. Genius in 1 second. Live. Bichilwan. Champagne. Mound. City F. On the bustling streets, the bustling scene of the city flashed past Gunan's eyes. Mansion? F. Kuhi was still hidden in a strange black robe as he quickly passed through the crowd. Gunan didn't have any intention of looking for trouble. The shadow servant had already turned into a shadow and was quietly lying on the ground. No one could detect it. As for Gunan himself, his outfit was a bit strange. However, the Divine Mansion world was a frontline plane, so there were many people who dressed up strangely. Gunan followed the shadow servant through the streets and alleys, and soon arrived at a remote corner. However, just as he turned the corner, a voice came from behind him. "Stop!" Gunan turned his head and saw 2 plainclothes patrolling policemen walking towards him with gloomy faces. One of them had one hand on his waist, while the other was holding a phone and quickly explaining something. The Divine Mansion world was a very interesting place. The technology here was advanced, but it was metaphysical technology, which was a bit different from pure physical technology. For example, the pistol that the policeman was about to pull out wasn't propelled by gunpowder, but by a high-energy explosive. The phone used by the other person was even more different. In fact, this was the first time Gunan had seen something like a phone outside of the astral plane. It wasn't that people didn't like to use convenient things like phones, but that most of the planes in the heavenly plane weren't like the astral plane. These planes had a circular sky and square Earth structure. There were no satellites or base stations, so how could a phone get a signal? Even if it was a phone from the Divine Mansion world, it definitely didn't use electromagnetic waves, but something more metaphysical. Gunnan's gaze swept across the two policemen. The interesting thing about the Divine Mansion world wasn't only the technology, but the people were also very interesting. These two plainclothes policemen were real plainclothes policemen. They wore the same uniform with the word plainclothes written on it. "Put your hands up." The plainclothes policeman with both hands on his waist said in a deep voice, "We don't have any ill intentions. We just need to check your identity. Please cooperate with us, sir." In the next moment, Gunnan cooperated and threw a punch. The two headless corpses slowly fell to the ground. A very low-quality phone. Gunnan picked up the phone from the corpse and looked at it before tossing it aside. Rather than calling it a cell phone, it was more like a walkie-talkie with a local area network. It was far less convenient than the sound transmission imprints of high-level cultivators. After getting rid of the two tails, Gunnan looked up and saw that the shadow servant had stopped outside the wall, motionless. Therefore, Gunnan did not even think about it, and just barged in. Although it was not difficult to take 2 more steps to enter the door, if players could tear down walls, why would they need to walk through the door? The huge noise that Gunnan made immediately shocked the people in the room. Mansion? In the courtyard, a woman was hung on a tree. Her body was covered with blood, and she was tortured to the point that she did not look like a human. Her right hand was cut off at the joint, and the flesh on her upper arm was scraped off, leaving only white bones. Her face was covered with knife wounds, and even half of her scalp was torn off. In front of her, a few men were eating and drinking happily. When Gunnan barged in, one of them shouted, "Where's the thing? Where's the thing?" Gunnan asked almost the same question as that person, except that his tone was a little calmer. Gunnan's aura in the black robe made him look like a guy who should not be messed with. The 4 men, sitting together, looked at each other and ran away at the same time. They had developed a tacit understanding long ago. They had a tacit understanding when killing enemies, and even more so when running for their lives. However, this was meaningless in front of Gunnan, for shadows appear behind them at the same time and directly grab them, throwing them into the endless shadows. They were just 4 level 3 opponents. Gunnan could easily deal with them. He walked unhurriedly to one of the shadows. On the ground over there was an exquisite box. Gunnan did not actually need to ask. He only asked to confirm if the thing was with the 4 people. If it was not, they would not have run away so easily. However, just when Gunnan was about to pick up the box, a streak of light suddenly flashed before him, and it actually snatched the box away. Gunnan raised his eyebrows. When he turned around, he saw a girl wearing light yellow casual clothes. She was standing next to him and waving the box in her hand at him. The girl looked like she was 15 or 16 years old. She was definitely young and pretty. She had a smile on her face. The most shocking thing was that her cultivation was at the peak of Break World. It was the real peak. Her rules were very close to being complete. She was only 1 step away from becoming a planet lord. Her power had nothing to do with Gunnan. He only knew that the woman in front of him had stolen something from him. The girl, who was famous for her speed, saw Gunnan's body move. He suddenly appeared in front of her. His left hand grabbed the box in her hand. His right hand swung toward her stomach. The yellow-clothed girl looked shocked, but her reaction was fast. Her body responded at the same time. She twisted her waist in a weird way, and her whole body seemed to twist into an arc. She dodged Gunnan's fist, but she couldn't keep the box in her hand. Gunnan casually snatched the box away and glanced at her with a strange expression. At his level, the number of people in the world who could fight him in close combat could be counted on one hand, even if they did not die after receiving one of his punches. When one's speed reached the limit, any moves or cultivation techniques would become meaningless. The girl was able to dodge his punch because he was using a clone. His level was the same as hers. If his real body was here, he would not even have to use his evil god body. "What is wrong with you?" The girl was still in shock. Seeing Gunan take the box back, she was angry. I am a member of the organization. How could you attack me without asking? Does the organization recruit break world people? Gunan coldly looked at her with disdain. With his current level, he could tell if she was a clone or a main body. The Sky God organization was a joint organization between Planet Lord and God Lord. They should not have a member who was below level 5. I am a reserve member, the girl said with wide eyes. She looked at Gunan. Aren't you the same? You received news that something was lost, so you came to help, right? The yellow-clothed girl could not tell who Gunan was, so she made up the story for him. Gunan was not going to explain it to her. He walked in front of the girl and asked, what about the other box? The woman was also in the transcendent realm, so she would not die so easily. However, the words that she said made Gunan and the man frown. Chapter 342. Genius 1 second. Live. Dichil 1. Champagne. Mongdang. City F asterisk CK. I only got one box. The woman was already on the verge of death. When she faced Gunan and Yuyang, she said these words with great difficulty. We are the employers. The girl in yellow was a little anxious. She thought that the other party did not believe their identity and said, my name is Yu Shuyun. Are you crazy? Before Yu Shuyun could even open her mouth to introduce her, the girl's chest had already been pierced by a shadow, and she was dragged to the ground. Gunan did not even look at her. He quickly summoned a new shadow servant and asked the same question. However, the answer made him very dissatisfied. This girl really only got one box. What is going on? Yu Shuyun roughly understood what Gunan was doing, but she also could not understand the result. The item should have been sent out by the gods on the other side to the gap between the two worlds. Then, they arranged for the people from this company to take over. During the whole process, whether it was the gods, the Star Master, or their subordinates, they did not have direct contact with the item to prevent the big shots from above from noticing. After all, their operation this time was the result that the 25 big shots of the two worlds did not want to see. But now, the item did not match up. What was the problem? Hey, where are you going? Yu Shiyun's mind was a mess. Seeing that Gunan turned to leave, she quickly asked, hey, where are you going? Meet up. In a remote area of Sky Mansion World, a skinny young man was curled up into a ball, hugging his knees. Tears kept flowing down his face. He was dirty and had footprints all over his body. He had just been bullied by a few old friends, but that was not the reason for his tears. The big yellow dog was lying next to him, but it was on the verge of death. Big yellow, I didn't expect that I would live longer. The young man reached out a hand and touched the big yellow dog's head, murmuring. The big yellow dog whimpered, but could only make weak sounds. Then, it used its remaining strength to push between the two of them. There was an exquisitely crafted little box there. You mean, you're leaving this for me? The youth said, slightly startled. He didn't really like the box. Although it looked like it was worth a lot of money, it was exchanged with Goldie's life. Since it was Big Yellow's relic, it should be inherited well. The young man nodded his head vigorously. I understand. He reached out a hand and opened the box. It didn't take much effort because after removing the packaging, there was nothing inside. It's empty. The youth was somewhat disappointed. In that case, the only value left in the box was the box itself. However, at this moment, an inexplicable aura burrowed into the young man's body, and a voice rang in his head. What's your name? Me? My name is Dong Sun. It was lost when it was sent to Heaven's Sanctum. In a quiet little house, a group of people with solemn expressions were surrounding a pile of small boxes. The one who spoke was an old Taoist priest. Gunan and Yu Shiyun were also among them, and the one who spoke was Taoist Master Spirit Yang. Of course, Taoist Master Spirit Yang's face was also hidden under a mask. If Gunan hadn't seen him before, he wouldn't have been able to recognize him. This group of people were members of the Celestial Society. They were responsible for retrieving Lorenz's scattered divine bodies and trying to reassemble them. Everyone present was wearing a mask, and all the official members had come with their avatars. This was to prevent traitors from appearing and getting wiped out in one fell swoop. Now that one box after another was retrieved, they discovered the problem. There were 3 boxes missing all at once. What security company? When this matter is over, we'll wipe them all out. A burly man beside him said angrily. As soon as he finished speaking, a silver-haired woman beside him smiled. We didn't intend to let them go anyway. Now is not the time to argue about this, Taoist Master Spirit Yang said in a deep voice. Let's split up and search. If someone opens the box, the aura will be very obvious. Whether it was the aura of a rank 10 or a god, it was like a beacon to them. We don't have much time, another person beside him said. This person looked similar to Gunan. He was wrapped in a black robe, and it was impossible to tell if he was a man or a woman. However, from the voice, he could tell that this person was a woman. Taoist Master Spirit Yang nodded. That's right. Whether or not we can find all the boxes in 2 days, we have to set off. What if we can't find all the boxes? Someone asked from behind. Taoist Master Spirit Yang was silent for a moment. Missing a piece of divine soul won't affect us too much. After receiving Taoist Master Spirit Yang's order, all the members of the Celestial Society set out to search for the 3 missing boxes. Gunan and Yushuyun had lost a box in their territory, so they naturally began to search for the missing boxes. Hey, wait a minute. Yushuyun shouted from behind Gunan. I have a friend. Wait a minute. Yushuyun saw that Gunan had no intention of stopping. He quickly walked forward, as if he hadn't heard her words. Yushuyun was so angry that she stomped her feet. She was also a proud daughter of heaven from a large plane. She was also very young, so her character wasn't as steady. Shuyun, what's wrong? A voice rang out beside her. It was a youth who had walked up to her. This youth had red lips and white teeth. Coupled with his elegant white clothes, he gave off the feeling of an elegant and beautiful youth. Abu, you came at the right time. Yu Shuyun had always been in a hurry. Let's hurry over. That guy is almost gone. The youth followed Yu Shuyun's finger, but all he could see was a blurry figure. Didn't I tell him to wait? The youth was surprised. I did. He ignored me. What a rude guy, the youth muttered. He took a step forward, and his figure unexpectedly appeared in front of Gunan. There was only one explanation for being able to do such a thing in such a crowded street. If it wasn't speed, then it was a spatial ability user. Gunan raised his head. This was the second time he had encountered a spatial ability user. The first time was the space dragon. However, the other party's identity didn't affect his attitude. What's the matter? The youth frowned slightly. He was dissatisfied with the other party's attitude, but his good upbringing didn't show it on his face. I'm Chibu from Shi Daotian. After saying this, he stood up straight and waited for the other party to introduce himself. Then, they would greet each other. This was how he had been educated. However, the Gunan in front of him didn't even look at him. He walked straight past him, leaving behind a puzzled sentence. Are there idiots in this kind of organization who would give their names? Chapter 343. Genius in 1 second. Live in Dichuan. Oh, Champagne. Duan Duan. City F *CK. Gunan looked at Chi Bu as if he was looking at an idiot. The Celestial God Society was a special organization that fought against the main gods of both worlds at the same time. Did he even need to consider hiding his identity? When Yu Shuyun introduced herself, Gunan didn't think much of it. After all, he didn't recognize a mere rank 4 as a member of the Celestial God Society. But Chi Bu was different. With Gunan's insight, he could easily tell that he was a Celestial Lord. He was a newly promoted Celestial Lord who hadn't had an astral world yet. He might not even have entered an inner world. Of course, no matter how young a Celestial Lord was, he was still a Celestial Lord. Hence, in Gunan's eyes, he was qualified to be an official member of the Celestial God Society. But in Chi Bu's eyes, these words were a kind of insult. In all honesty, he had been dragged into the Celestial God Society by Yu Shuyun decades ago, before he had completed his promotion. But Chi Bu had never cared about this organization, and Yu Shuyun was habitually ignorant. The two of them didn't even know the name of the organization. For Yu Shuyun, joining a secret organization was more of a thrill of operating in the dark. The two of them glared at Gunan, but Gunan completely ignored them. His figure disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Really? When uncultured person? Chibu watched as Gunan disappeared, but he didn't know what to say. In the end, He could only say these words. He was born in Shi Daotian's Confucian Academy. His words and actions were very particular about etiquette. He usually didn't even curse. Shi Daotian was also one of the 13 heavens. It was the most famous and well-known superplane among the 13 heavens. This was because Shi Daotian, as its name suggested, had the most academies in the plane. It was the place where students from all over the universe yearned to study. Because of this, Shi Daotian had the largest number of celestial lords stationed there. Some were outstanding students like Qi Bu, but most were teachers. Yu Xuyan was also from Shi Daotian, but she was clearly not from Confucian College. Abu, we must find him and teach him a good lesson. Yu Xuyan chimed in from the side, waving her fists vigorously. Didn't she drag Qi Bu just to teach that arrogant guy a lesson? Ever since she graduated from the academy, Yu Xuyan, who had never suffered a loss against someone of the same rank, always wanted to regain her dignity. Dong Sun panted heavily. His face was splattered with blood, but the warmth surging through his body made him exceptionally happy. I still want more power. He ruthlessly stabbed the dagger into the chest of a young man on the ground. Meanwhile, the young man on the ground did not move at all. Only a small amount of blood was still flowing out, because he was already a corpse. In the dark alley, there were nearly 10 corpses lying around. They were the youths who had often bullied Dong Sun. Now, they could no longer do it. Dong Sun forcefully stabbed a few more times before standing up, panting heavily. A morbid smile appeared on his face. "Ew, what are you doing?" A slightly panicked voice came from behind him. Dong Sun quickly turned his head. It was a man in a suit who happened to pass by and was hurriedly retreating. This was just an ordinary office worker. He had not even practiced martial arts and had never seen such a bloody scene before. Meanwhile, Dong Sun, who had just turned 14, had a strange smile on his lips. His body rushed out like a leopard. His speed was actually not fast at all. He was not very strong to begin with, and he was also in a state of exhaustion. However, this was enough to deal with an ordinary person. The dagger stabbed straight into the man's abdomen, but Dong Sun had no intention of stopping. His right hand twitched wildly, and the dagger quickly moved in and out. Blood flowed endlessly as if it was free. The man struggled with all his might, but he was pressed tightly in Dong Sun's arms, unable to break free. The next moment, the dagger suddenly slashed the main artery on the man's neck. Dong Sun, who was not very familiar with the technique, used more force, and more blood gushed out. Dong Sun, however, had no intention of dodging at all. Instead, he moved his face closer and let the blood pour down from his head. Soon, it was all over his body, and his face showed a look of enjoyment. In just a short span of 2 days, he had turned from an ignorant teenager into a psychopathic murderer. There was nothing he could do about it. After accepting Lorenza's power, he was destined to walk this path. Perhaps the name of the god of flowers sounded beautiful, but it should not be forgotten that Lorenza was a goddess of darkness from the moment she became a god. Blossom was a kind of flower, but in Lorenza's hometown, it was a strange flower that fed on animals. When a flower was full, it would spit out the extra blood it had ingested, forming an extremely beautiful flower of blood on the outside. That was the origin of flowers. Therefore, flowers could also be referred to as flowers of blood. You're progressing very fast. A cold voice similar to Lorenza's echoed in Dong Sun's head. Dong Sun slowly opened his eyes. His fatigue was greatly relieved. He grinned and said, "If I can get power, I will have nothing to fear." Of course, he did not know that while he was enjoying the fountain of blood, a figure was standing in the shadows, watching everything calmly. He can actually fuse with a wisp of Lorenza's soul? No, it should be said that this wisp of soul mutated. Interesting. It's not easy to find the 3 missing boxes. The Divine Abode world is very chaotic. We don't even know what's in the boxes. Qi Bu and Yu Xuyan could not help but complain as they walked on the street. Qi Bu had always been a very serious person. Since they were looking for the missing items, he even wanted to find all 3 boxes by himself. He had to do things that ordinary people could not in order to show the excellence of the disciples of Shi Daotian. Unfortunately, They were perfectly stuck at the first step. Where exactly was the box lost? No idea. Who was the one who lost the box? No idea. What was in the box, and what effect would it have if someone took it away? No idea at all. There was no information at all. Where was he going to start looking? Damn. Chibu, who was originally full of ambition, suddenly fell into an impasse. He had no clue at all. Yu Shuyun, on the other hand, was not anxious at all. She was still happily strolling around with Chibu. According to her words, it was, maybe the clue will appear on its own? How could that be possible? Chibu's retort did not last long. The roadside news broadcast mentioned a wanted poster. It was about a vicious and perverted murderer. Did you see the news just now? It just appeared 2 days ago. Chibu nodded slowly and said seriously, I take back what I said just now. Chapter 344. Genius in 1 second. Block. Dichio Bayuan. Champagne. Mound. City F***. CK. Gunan was still following behind Dong's son, observing his every move. However, his mind was thinking about many other things. When he was faced with the pile of Lorenza's divine body fragments, he did have other thoughts. For example, should he steal all the boxes and reassemble himself into Lorenza, then eat them as EXP? However, this thought only lasted for a moment before it was kicked out of his mind. The reason was simple. Lorenza's level was too high, and she would suffer from indigestion. As Gunan's value increased, so did his level. He slowly began to think about how to conceal his identity as an evil god. In the game, players would be completely exposed once they completed their second-class advancement. There was no way to hide their identity. Even before the second-class advancement, there was a chance that they would be discovered if they came face-to-face with a few extremely powerful lords at the 9th or 10th level. After research by the players, they realized that the true deciding factor was none other than the sin value. The higher the sin value, the higher the chance of exposing one's identity as an evil god. Therefore, even though Gu-nin could now go to the world of gods and knew the weaknesses of many gods, he still had no intention of going on a killing spree. In the game in his past life, this was designed to prevent players from ignoring the rules of the game and killing on a large scale. If the players killed too many gods and the construction of the god kingdom did not keep up, the evil god's temple would not be able to level up due to insufficient points, and they would not be able to increase their own level. Then the gods would discover their identity, and it would be game over. Therefore, it was not a problem for Gu-nin to kill some minor gods at the 7th or 8th level. If he devoured a 10th level god at once, he might expose himself, and it would not be worth it. On the other hand, Gu-nin also wanted to see what would happen if Lorenza successfully fused with the heavenly worlds. What would happen when she returned to the other side? The appearance of a new Lord God would instantly break the balance between the two major god systems, and it was not impossible for it to lead to a war between the gods. If the divine war really broke out, then Gu-nin would be too happy. He could fish in troubled waters, and the efficiency of the divine kingdom's war would be greatly increased. However, that was what he had thought before. After seeing Dong Sun's soul in Lorenza's body, which seemed to have awakened its own consciousness, Gu-nin changed his mind. If Lorenza really became a main god, then this wisp of soul in front of him would probably represent unimaginable value. Let's kidnap the person first, then slowly confirm the situation of the split soul. There are also 2 kids who can act as cover. This method again. Chibu looked at the corpses and blood on the ground and couldn't help but reveal a disgusted expression. This was already the 3rd time they had encountered such a scene in their pursuit of the fugitive. It wasn't that the 2 of them had never seen a dead person before, but such a scene always made them feel uncomfortable. Yu Shuyun stopped in her tracks, as if she was listening attentively to something. What's wrong? Chibu turned around and asked. There's news from the organization, Yu Shuyun replied quickly. 2 boxes have been found. They suspect that the 3rd box is in the hands of the fugitive who appeared out of nowhere. 2 boxes have been found? Chibu's mouth twitched. In that case, we need to hurry up. Chibu, the top student from Shi Dao Tian, was suddenly filled with fighting spirit. At this time, There was a strange movement in front of the two of them. Chibu, who was a space power user, blurted out, "Someone is opening a space tunnel." The two of them didn't say anything else, and they quickly rushed forward. When they arrived, Dong-sun was still unconscious. He was slowly being placed into the space tunnel. World breakers had the power to tear space, but if they wanted to bring people through, it was difficult. The difficulty was that the space tunnel wasn't stable enough, and the transport speed was very slow. Because of this, Chibu and Yushuyun felt relieved. They could make it in time, as long as they got rid of the person maintaining the space tunnel. Chibu's eyes suddenly widened, and he looked forward. "It's you." Chibu couldn't help but yell angrily, "You traitor!" In front of him was that familiar black-robed figure, whose face was hidden under a silver mask. Even though Chibu didn't know much about this mysterious organization, he knew that they were all united and looking for the box. But this guy wanted to send the box away. Yushiyun also looked at this scene with a blank expression. She still couldn't believe it. But the next moment, Gunin shattered her fantasies. His body moved, and his fist landed in front of the two of them. "Be careful." Chibu pushed Yushiyun away, and space ripples appeared in front of him. These ripples moved and spun in the space, and finally formed 5 big words: righteousness in heaven and earth. The moment the 5 big words appeared, it was as if some kind of meaning had been added to them, and a righteous aura appeared out of thin air. Although Chibu had become a Star Lord, he didn't look down on them at all. It was obvious that he was going all out. The power of space was his natural power, and Confucianism was the essence of what he had learned in his life. Now that he had perfectly combined them, he was able to step into the Star Lord realm in one fell swoop. Chibu's right hand formed a pen with 2 fingers, and he quickly drew on the 5 big words before pushing them out. He didn't underestimate his opponent, but he would never underestimate himself. Crack. After a soft sound, everything that Chibu had carefully set up in an instant was shattered in front of Gunan's fist. Too weak. Gunan couldn't help but shake his head, but this wasn't beyond his expectations. He had used his full strength in this punch, and it was different from the casual attack that Yushiyun had dodged. Its strength had reached an astonishing level. Even if Chibu was a Star Lord, and even if Gunan was just a clone, there was no doubt about the result of a head-on collision. They were both space attribute Star Lords, but Chibu was much weaker than the space dragon. If one wanted to deal with the body of an evil god, they could only rely on some strange methods. Gunan directly stepped forward. Chibu's expression changed slightly, but his hands didn't tremble in the slightest as he wrote one character after another on Gunan's body. The moment these characters appeared, they would directly hit Gunan's body, leaving him no chance to react. This was the terrifying part of Chibu's spatial ability. But to his surprise, Gunan had no intention of dodging at all, and instead let the characters hit him. The next moment, Gunan's figure had already swept in front of Chibu, and his fist fell straight down, targeting the top of Chibu's head. With Gunan's terrifying speed, even Chibu himself had no time to react. So who could save him? Not to mention, there really was one person at the scene. Yushiyun's law was related to speed, and in that split second, she ran out without thinking and stood in front of Chibu. No. Chibu reacted this time. He watched the fist fall, and a roar full of grief and indignation came from his mouth. He had never hated his own incompetence so much. If he could, he would definitely choose to die in place of Yushiyun. Bang! Gunan's fist penetrated Yushiyun's chest and then smashed Chibu's head into pieces.